Why on earth a Westminster committee is looking at policing in the way that we are. Clearly, somebody has to step up to the plate of public scrutiny in the absence of a functioning Stormont and executive, and as a committee we've decided that we should step into that gap to ensure that information is available to the public on the record, and the democratically accountable people across the piece are holding people to account.
On that point,
Claire.
could I just put on record my concerns that the policing board aren't here, and I appreciate it is a choppy time. There is a lot going on, but my understanding is there hasn't been a meeting in public since the data breach. The one that was scheduled for later this week isn't occurring, and I think it would have been useful and appropriate to have the policing board here as part of this session, and as part of our scrutiny, and as a part of people feeling that these issues are being properly scrutinised.
Claire, it's a point I take. It's a point well made. We will hear from them. Whether we have to use our rights to summon witnesses, which we can, or whether they can then find a time voluntarily to appear before us. But the board should be in no doubt at all that they will appear before this committee to take our questions, and will do so in public. I was as disappointed as everybody that they felt unable to come today. I suppose the germane fact is the Chief Constable resigning yesterday obviously played a part, but we will hear from them. And just before we turn to questions, I just wanted to put on record, as I did this morning in a media interview, that anybody who steps up to the plate to be Chief Constable of the PSNI, it is probably the most difficult gig in policing. And anybody who does it, I make no comment at all qualitatively or anything else, but deserves, I think, the recognition and thanks of this committee and the people of Northern Ireland for being prepared to step up and try to police and try to shape a modern police service fit for the current circumstances. And I personally wish Simon Byrne well in whatever he then chooses to go on to. Anyway, we have 4 important voices before us this morning, and we're very grateful to the 4 of you for finding the time to appear at what I know was short notice. We'll be principally focusing on this morning the very significant data breach, but there will obviously be other issues which will play into our questions. So I'm going to kick off just by asking the 4 of you to provide us with a snapshot, if you will. What is the mood of those that you represent at the moment? What are their concerns? What are their fears, hopes or anxieties? Tracy Godfrey, let's start with you, shall we?
Okay.
I don't know. We'll just go left to right, and then we'll maybe go backwards for question 2.
Just to set some context, I have 40 years service for the RUC and PSNI as a police staff member. I am seconded to work for NIPSA, the trade union. The feedback I'm getting from the membership is they are dismayed that their details are out in the open. Like me, they've never really told anybody who they work for. We've had those, we're going to say, hairdressing conversations. Where do you work for? I actually work for Castle Buildings, DHSS, and you inevitably get, oh, do you know so-and-so? And you go, no. So we have kept really low key. We are not weaponised, so we can't protect ourselves if someone's to come knocking at our door. And we don't routinely have security around our homes. We do check under our cars. But this has just heightened the whole aspect of security. And just to put it in context as well, police staff do a wide range of front-facing roles now, more so than they ever did. So we're out there as well. As CSIs, we take calls for call handling, dispatchers, the list goes on. But I think that people don't realise the roles that we do. And our custody detention officers are coming face to face with dissidents all the time, and they're having to live in communities. So it's a huge impact on the police staff.
UCS McNally.
Good morning, members, and thanks for the invite. My role here is the President of the Superintendents Association. Firstly, in terms of what's the mood music like, I think from my association's perspective, I would look at that on two fronts. Firstly, strategically, and then on a personal level. I think strategically, our members recognise that we're in an unprecedented situation here. It felt to me a little bit like COVID. We all knew that we'd got a significant problem. There's no policy, there's no playbook, and we have to work our way through it. And I would very much commend that the organisation has done that, and the Gold Commander for that, Chris Todd, has done a sterling job in our respects, trying to feel his way through the unknown that we're faced with. The mood music's also one of particular sadness. Here we are, 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement. We have police officers in Northern Ireland still having to check under their cars, still having to hide their identity, as Tracy said. And it's sad that we're in that environment when we consider other jurisdictions, be that here in the United Kingdom or across the world, where police officers are welcomed into their communities, and in fact are almost favoured to live in communities. But sadly, Northern Ireland has not moved to that space, and that's not helped by an absence of a functioning government, amongst other things. I'm immensely proud of the officers and staff, both within my association, but also the other associations represented here today. There's a sense of pride. Our officers and staff are still coming to work every day. They're still putting themselves in harm's way. They're still dealing with all of the troubles that we face against the very strong, real and present dissident threat that exists in Northern Ireland and is extant. So those are the strategic points. On a personal level, our officers, and it is officers within the Superintendents Association, have a wide range of views. Some, like myself, frankly, who are more akin to being in the public space, are probably more relaxed, shall I say, around this, but equally there are those who work in roles that they have tried to conceal their identity from their families, from their friends, maybe not even as a police officer, but within the specifics of the role that they do within policing, and they are deeply concerned and deeply troubled by what's going on. They want assurances as to what the organisation and what government are going to do to protect them. Money will play into that, as I'm sure we'll discuss here today. So there is a range of emotions, but there is a sense of deep frustration, deep sadness. We want to move forward, we want to fix this, we want to get back to doing our jobs, and we want the support of government and our organisation to help us do so.
Thank you. Superintendent Murray.
My name is Jerry Murray there. I'm an operational police officer with over 50 years service between RUC and Police Service of Northern Ireland. I represent my members within the Catholic Guild, staff and police officers, and we're coming from a position where policing for Catholics, whether it be staff or police officer, is not in their DNA. If you were to go to the college on the family night where families come together, you can see where the DNA of officers and staff who are a different community background to myself coming forward, they have a automatic network of grandfathers, grandmothers, uncles, brothers, sisters in the police. When young Catholics, whether staff or police, are coming forward, first of all, they're leaving areas where they know they're not going back to. And they're not bringing the culture into the organisation as you would if you were from Carrickfergus or Donaghadee. But police officers, whether staff or police coming from a Catholic background, are divorced straight away from their communities. And this is the difficulty. And some, even from the point of view, haven't even informed their families of what has happened with regards to the breach. We have had officers, one, resigning, going from the organisation. Our members are frightened, scared, have no idea what tomorrow will bring from them. And I have instances where young Catholic officers are asking me, do they carry their personal protection weapon when they go to Mass? There is a fear with regards to retention.
Sorry, that's quite a dramatic thing. That you've been asked whether an officer a police officer should take their gun to church for their personal protection.
That's correct. That has happened, and the advice I've given, yes, you do, because the idea is that they should feel safe while entering the Catholic Church and also leaving the Catholic Church, and there's no better way. The issue of a personal protection weapon is for that, for personal protection. I would fear, given the length of service I have been in this organisation, that we will have a major difficulty. Probably we will survive with regards to retention, but with regards to recruitment, and if you look at the last census in 2021 there, it's something at 45 or 47% Catholic. Well, that should be the bar which the Police Service of Northern Ireland should be adhering to, and also the other associations with minority associations. If you go up to 13 Dunglow Crescent, I believe, or maybe that's not the correct number, but you can see actually one of our recruiting posters where they have put in it, do not join the PSNI. Already there is this propaganda starting, and we are starting from zero now. There's no recruitment, there's no budget for recruitment, but we have a window of opportunity for the next 2 years to get up and running with regards to actually putting forward our views as the Catholic Guild, how we can recruit Catholic staff and Catholic police officers. We're running around about 33% Catholic police officers, and after 22 years with the Police Service of Northern Ireland, 19% are staff members coming into the organisation, or in on the organisation. And there are difficulties. Our members are frightened, and it's up to the senior management team to take us through this and bring us out the other end.
Thank you, that's very sobering. Mr. Kelly.
Good morning, Chair, good morning, Committee, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Liam Kelly. I'm the current chairperson of the Police Federation for Northern Ireland. I've been a police officer for 29 years. Firstly, I'd like to put on record as well, Chair, if it's okay, about the resignation of Simon Byrne. It was the right thing to do, but I also recognise it's a man who's committed over 40 years of public service to policing right across the UK. It's a sad but inevitable end to his career, but I do wish him well and his family well going forward. But back to the matters at hand in relation to the data breach. We're the statutory staff association for 6,500 police officers, ranging in rank from student officer right through to chief inspector. We represent a broad church of people who have similar or different religious beliefs, or none whatsoever, differing political, cultural backgrounds, and sexual orientation. We're united, in our view, to serve the public without fear or favour. Our collective view of policing at the moment is we're in a dark place, we're in a downward spiral. The others have referred to a few pressures that are there. Budget is a massive pressure, erosion of pay and conditions, the fact we have no government, reduced resource, doing more with less. Morale has been plummeting and plummeting rapidly. We've no recruitment. Retention is a massive issue, that loss of experience, but also the loss of officers at the start of their police careers and mid-service. And that was prior to the data breach. As was quite eloquently has been laid out, we are, despite 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, we still find that we are having to police in Northern Ireland against the backdrop of a severe terrorist threat, both on and off duty. So you ask what the impact has been of the data breach. From my members and from my own perspective, we're appalled, we're shocked, we're dismayed, and we're scared about the implications about what has happened. Because the reality around this, our officers from whatever persuasion take their personal security very seriously. They feel betrayed because it was their employer who has put this information into the public domain. And now that genie is out of the bottle, as we all know with the internet, once it's out there, it's out there. There's no way they're going to be able to put the lid back on this. So we now move into a process of managing the consequences. And that has been led by Assistant Chief Constable Todd, who's with us and you will hear from later this morning. The impact, there's a spectrum of impact on our members. We have some people who are relaxed because, as Anthony has pointed out, they are already in the public domain. People know who they are. But we also have a number of officers, whether that be because of their community background or because of the role they're performing in PSNI, whether that be intelligence, surveillance, are feeling very vulnerable around this. Again, we're in a uniquely hazardous position as police officers in Northern Ireland, and that takes a lot of courage to be a police officer in Northern Ireland. This data breach has not helped, and really it's about what happens next to try and build not only public confidence but officer confidence that the organisation has our back.
Again, sobering comments. Is it a fair assessment, because I think this is an important message for people across Northern Ireland, that notwithstanding, I'm not diminishing the data breach or the resignation of the chief, but day-to-day policing across Northern Ireland is taking place today. It took place yesterday. It will take place tomorrow. It will take place next month, just as it did last month and this time last year. That is, I think, quite an important message, and you've all nodded in agreement to that. Three of you have mentioned concerns about, Ms. Godfrey, you sort of talked about it briefly, about retention and recruitment. Setting aside the motivations of people either to join or to leave, how can one attenuate against a quantifiable diminution of the quality of policing, of the scope of policing, of intelligence gathering, etc., going forward post the data breach, if the fears of recruitment and retention, or retention and recruitment, come to pass? Is that a sort of, do we move into sort of, Dodge City type environment?
I think firstly, to highlight, there has been a pause on recruitment,
yes,
more or less for a period of time anyway, so we need to note that. There is no doubt that as an organisation,
That's been, just to clarify, that's been additional recruitment, not replacement, hasn't it?
there has been
No recruitment
there's been
whatsoever.
no recruitment. So we're in a position where we're not recruiting. We feel that this data breach will exacerbate the challenges around that in a number of fronts. Firstly is financial. The reason why we're not recruiting is because we don't have a budget to recruit. We are now going to spend, and Chris Todd will allude potentially to some figures, millions, tens of millions of pounds to fix the challenges of this data breach. So that creates an even blacker hole,
yes,
in what I believe to be a £52 or £3 million deficit as of last week. So goodness knows what the figure will be whenever we work out what resolution is required to the data breach. Things are being put in place such as replacing officers' numerals, so on. There will be, I'm sure, a strong request, and in fact there is a strong request from officers and staff for personal security measures, of which the details are yet to be worked out, but that will run to tens of millions of pounds. And then there's litigation. There are people who quite rightly feel that their information has been put into the public domain against the law, frankly, and they will seek remuneration for that. So that creates that huge challenge for us in terms of how can we recruit, but not only then how can we recruit, but how can we continue to sustain the current delivery model. You will have heard the Chief Constable say a number of months ago about a 90-day review. That 90-day review, I suggest, will probably be back on the shelf and start it again, because we'll now have to work to a lesser budget. These are very difficult times for our members.
I'm sure we will question the ACC on this, but just to sort of set the scene for us as a committee, could you just, we've been talking about the what, which is the breach. We haven't touched really upon the how. What's your individual assessments or your organisation's assessments as to how on earth this could have happened? What's your sort of hunch or intelligence on that? Should we start with Mr. Kelly?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly, as has been laid out at the start, there was human error involved in putting the information into the public domain by way of a spreadsheet that was attached to a legitimate freedom of information request. However, the concerns that we have around that, which is what the investigation being led by the City of London Police will establish, is that the systems and procedures that the PSNI had in play to try and mitigate that happening were basically not up to standard. And spinning off that, the scenario would be that there will be recommendations coming forward, and just to pick up on Anthony's point there around, there definitely is additionality required here financially, both to manage the current position as it stands, as has been laid out, but also there'll be recommendations. I've no doubt there'll be recommendations from the City of London. That will cost money to do that. If there has to be wholesale changes to some of the information technology or the structures that PSNI have, then that will come into play. And clearly the costs, as we've seen, are continuing to rise. around what that is. So, and again, I say that's against the backdrop that PSNI were, and Anthony, in my mind, has undersold the actual problem of the deficit. The deficit, you know, as the PSNI have stand. So without recruitment, without standing still, at the minute they're sitting within around £50 million. Yeah. But as an organisation, if they actually need to move on, start recruitment again, start delivering the police service that our communities deserve, that number is going to increase toward 200 million. And that's my understanding from talking to the Chief Operating Officer around this. So this is a crisis. And it's a crisis that I don't think, even if we've reformed the Northern Ireland Executive, that money is not within the coffers of Stormont to allocate to policing. That's a reality. So we need Westminster and we need UK government to step in here and assist with this.
I'm sure you had better things to do at about 11:30 last evening, but this was a theme in the debate in the Chamber on the budget number 2 bill. And I'm sure it is one that we will return to, not least in Northern Irish oral questions tomorrow to the Secretary of State. Superintendent Murray,
from the point of view
how?
From the point
I mean, if your how is all the same as Mr. Kelly, just say it's the same as Mr. Kelly, and we can then move on to Mr. Shannon's question.
Can I just say this, Chair, with regards to the Police Service of Northern Ireland is probably one of the most accountable police organisations within the United Kingdom, and recommendations are well and fine, but there needs to be an oversight body that actually will make sure that the recommendations are not only put in place, but they're regularly checked and counter-checked against threat, risk and harm. The difficulty with recommendations, we have the recommendations come from the Patton Report at 25 years of age. Still, we haven't got some of those implemented. Recommendations will be brilliant, and it will put us on the path to going back to a service which we should all proud of within Northern Ireland. But there needs to be the oversight body that has the authority, the accountability and the direction to make sure that the recommendations are implemented.
Which is why it's really important to have a review of the MO of the board, won't it? Mr. McNally.
My answer links to Liam's in terms of his articulation around the financial challenges, but those financial challenges, what you have to remember at the end of all of this, are people. There are people who come to work, come in every day to do their best. No one comes into work to make a mistake. But when you ask 6,500 officers and less staff than there were 13 years ago to do the work that they were being asked to do under significant strain, FOIs are in abundance, as everyone knows who works in the public sector. When you put humans in a situation, you're asking them to do more because of the lack of a financial settlement, then mistakes will happen. And I have every sympathy for those that were involved in this.
Ms. Godfrey.
Can I just say two things about staff recruitment, police staff recruitment? Ours is on freeze as well. We're having a huge difficulty recruiting senior people into the organisation. We haven't got a director of HR. That's been advertised and re-advertised many times. People have been offered it and backed away from it for whatever reason. So we also have a problem there. As far as we do need money. We do need money to help fix this. And you know, there's 2,500 police staff, and my mantra I've been going around the place saying is that, you know, we don't get the same amount of danger money, I'm going to call it for better words, as our police officer colleagues. And we don't argue that we should get exactly the same, but we are sitting on a rate of £580 that hasn't been uplifted in 33 years.
Right.
So the Chief Constable, Simon Byrne, did sign off a business case, but that has bounced back and forward to DOJ with no sort of any kind of aspect of it coming forward. We're always told it's affordability. So now we're spending millions on the data breach.
Yes.
So we think money needs to come forward to pay us the amount we've asked for.
Yes. That's an important point, and we'll make sure that that is captured, and thank you for making it. Mr. Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First of all, can I put on record, Mr. Chairman, my thanks to all of the police officers across the whole of Northern Ireland and for what they do. We very much appreciate it. I think, Superintendent Murray, I think you had a conversation with me last week about a different matter, and I thank you for your interest in that matter and for your help and assistance as well, much appreciated. We're all very supportive of the PSNI, and we want to put that on record. But my concerns, and they probably go back to what you mentioned there earlier on, Liam, and that's to do with the police officers who, a large number of those who live within my constituency service presently as PSNI officers, service in the past as RUC officers, civilian staff, families, those loved ones, Mr. Chairman, who have lost family members over service over the years. So this hurt that we've talked about, it isn't just for those of today who are serving, it's for everyone, and I think that hurt goes deep. So when it comes to grasping just the impact of what this means, I think words would be very difficult to describe, really, Mr. Chairman, how we all feel. And I think we've got to go back to past history where there's been failures in the Bobby Story funeral. I had a constituent who was burying their loved one at Roselawn and were unable to do so, and didn't know until that morning that their funeral could not go ahead because Bobby Stories was going ahead. Why was that decision made? I questioned that at the time. I'm well on record as asking that question, and I do even today feel aggrieved that those who wished to bury their loved ones at Roselawn were unable to do so because priority and preference was given to Bobby's Story and his family, oblivious to the feelings of others. Then we take it forward another step. Just 3 quick examples. The second one is the Armour Road one. And I understand, and I think everyone will understand it only too well, the 2 officers in the middle of COVID observed an incident taking place.
Mr. Shannon, can I just interrupt? Can I just remind all colleagues of the sub judice, the potential for an appeal on that is still live. I'm sure we can come on to it as an issue, but I want to, in this early stage of the hearing, focus on the data breach and that impact rather than that case, as important as it is, and we will come to it in due course. But can I urge you just to focus? Can we just focus on the fallout of the data breach in the first instance? I think that's what our witnesses are more qualified to.
Mr. Chairman, I understand very well, but there's a history of procedurally how things have went wrong, and that's the incident which we come up to today. The fact of the matter is that officers sought advice, followed that advice, and then found themselves in a very, very difficult position. The overbearance of chief officers, the Chief Superintendent and ACC, and those incidents, and each one of those incidents the whole way through has led to where we were with the data breach. And the day that the data breach took place, I had a number of constituents who had contacted me, and didn't believe at the very beginning that someone had leaked it on purpose. No, they didn't. It was a mistake, as you rightly say, Liam, but the robust oversee that should have been necessary. I understand there's 5 different levels of it when it comes to making sure the procedure has been followed. It failed at every one of those 5 hurdles, and it really, really makes me question what is happening with the leadership at the top. If it's wrong at the top, then it filters its way down. So when it comes to understanding the failures in leadership and the decisions and actions of the PSNI that has brought it into disrepute, you'll understand why retired police officers, chief inspectors, superintendents, constables, sergeants, families are all asking the same question. Why is it that our beloved RUC and beloved PSNI have found themselves in this difficult position? It's clear to numerous serving officers that they've highlighted that normal procedure has either been a willful neglect of risk assessment procedures or even worse than that. What assessment has been or should be carried out to ascertain what is accurate in relation to that? And has an assessment been carried out as when it comes to integrity? For instance, on this Act, I'm sure I have it and many others have it, where we have an opinion of the Chief Constable and we have an opinion of the ACC. 2 different opinions, 2 different accounts of the story. By its very nature, it makes you wonder just what's happening at the top of the PSNI when it comes to moving forward. I suppose the question that I want to... I make this point. Former Chief Constable Jack Herman...
Jim, could I ask you to ask a question rather than make a point?
Well, I'm going to make some then I'm going to ask my question. Jack Herman always had the back of his police officers. The officers knew that, and if they were wrong, Jack Herman called them out, but he always made sure that they were supported. And I do not see that support at the levels of the PSNI at this moment in time. So when it comes, and the question is, Mr. Chairman, forgive me, apologies for labouring it a wee bit, but I need to get these points on the record, because there's many people who have contacted me, former and present. What assessment has been carried out to understand a way forward to building relations with all moral and upstanding people from every background who find themselves absolutely flabbergasted to see the influence of one political party on operational matters within the PSNI, and who will oversee this issue, bearing in mind the lack of engagement of leadership that has been shown, not just at the top levels of PSNI, but also, can I say with great respect, Mr. Chairman, within the highest office of the Northern Ireland office as well. Thank you.
I think one of the things that must be put in, the Chief Constable must withhold or hold the power of independence. Independence, the office of Chief Constable is that he is totally independent with regards to without fear or favour, and that must be retained. We need to move forward with regards to through the policing board, through the recruitment of a new Chief Constable. I would say that I think that the senior police officers, the senior management team, are disengaged from the rank and file on the ground. And you mentioned Sir Jack Herman, the late Sir Jack Herman. I served with him, and he was there out on the beat and had a concept of policing in better times, though he came through the worst of the times. But I believe that there needs to be further engagement between the senior executive team, and that also includes engaging, the senior executive team includes engaging with the minority associations, but also with the rank and file. And there is that disengagement, and maybe out of this some good will come, because at the end of the day it's about the service to the people of Northern Ireland. They want to see themselves in the police that obviously serve the communities that they come from, and that's vital.
If I can make a couple of points, I think it's important, Jim, what you've said there about the police family and the extended police family, because there's a lot of pride in being police officer, whether you be serving or retired, and that has been damaged, not only as a result of the data breach, but some of the revelations we've seen in the last few weeks. And I agree completely with what Jerry has said there about the disconnect, that there has been a disconnect for some time. And unfortunately, PSNI went through a process here of doing what was termed a cultural audit. In the last few months, the results of it were supposed to be coming out this month. From my perspective, I think that cultural audit is now defunct, because it was carried out in advance of some of these matters coming to the fore. And I think if you go to the membership now and ask them, do they feel confident with the senior leadership? Do they feel confident in relation to credibility of service and some of the decision making that a light has been shown on? And some of these circumstances, I think the answers are going to be significantly different from where we were. So, yeah, again, the reality around this, my opening address to yourselves was about fear or favour. That applies to every rank in the PSNI. It does not just apply to the junior officers.
Okay, anybody else want to add anything?
Just to echo those sentiments, I think firstly, in terms of I think we'd all welcome the fact that there's already an independent review started around the data breach. I think we all need to, and that's with those within policing, as well as members of the public, members of government and others need to understand from an independent perspective what went wrong, so we can all learn and we can all understand how that happened, and make sure that those steps are put in place to ensure that no such horror ever happens again. In terms of the engagement piece you mentioned, Jim, I agree with you. I think engagement...
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
And I know occasionally this makes me sound very stuffy, but can we not refer to each other by our Christian names, please? Just for the formality's sake of this committee and the public's perception of it.
Certainly. You mentioned the engagement piece. Again, I would refer to the fact that you have now 6,500 police officers. That becomes all the more challenging in terms of policing visibility. And again, I would echo the sentiments that needs to be addressed in terms of the numbers that we have in the medium to long term. And again, I would echo the sentiments that I have published a statement on behalf of my association last night that we feel that we've been disengaged from the senior team for a period of time, but particularly over the past number of weeks. And we've asked for an urgent meeting to look to address that, to try to restore our confidence in them, but for us then to deliver for the community.
Alfred, did you have any?
Police staff, I really think that the review is how we're going to find out what's gone wrong and how we can fix it. I'm not going to be here to sit and apportion blame to anyone. Yeah. I do think it's under-resourcing, and people are too busy to do everything that's asked of them, and there's pressures on them, especially in FOI. There was already a constraint on we weren't replying quickly enough, and I don't know whether the emphasis was put on response times rather than quality.
That will be something maybe somebody would wish to take up with Mr. Todd in due course. Just pausing there for a moment before I turn to Bob Stewart. The city police are obviously doing their sort of oversight work. It will throw up questions about operations and change and so on and so forth. There will be a competing desire out there to fill the vacuum of Chief Constable to effectively steady the ship. How sensible would it be to do that quickly rather than, or possibly is it better to wait for the outcomes to actually work out the questions which need to be answered and then identify the person best suited to answer those questions rather than try and retrofit a skill set to a new box of challenges?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, it's vital that we have leadership in place as quickly as possible in the organisation, which is why I was on some local media this morning around this, that the Secretary of State needs to move here in the absence of the Justice Minister and assisting the Policing Board and the Department of Justice in getting somebody in post as quickly as possible. And that will be a challenge. I mean,
we need to legislate. My understanding is to be able
and that's
to
my
give us
understanding
the powers
of it.
To do that.
Yeah, and that's my understanding of it too. So that needs to happen forthwith, because the longer this goes on, and I mean, I think I'll be candid here. Mr. Hamilton, as the Deputy Chief Constable, is now the senior police officer in our service. Mr. Hamilton, in relation to what has happened in other matters, is still vulnerable in my eyes in relation to whether he continues being in service or not, or having the confidence of our officers. I've invited Mr. Hamilton to come to our executive committee tomorrow so he can address some of my members and representatives' concerns around the way forward. That's going to take some form of an investigation into exactly what happened in those other matters. But ultimately, there's an overarching look here about the leadership in our service, and I know one of our senior leaders is in the room with that there. That's going to be deeply uncomfortable for those people, but it needs to be done to establish credibility not only in service but publicly and politically as well in the policing service that we provide in Northern Ireland.
Anybody?
Just with regards to Chair, is for some time now we've had managers at the top of this organisation and a consensus of which way we should go. This organisation, because of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, because of we're coming out of 30 years of trouble, we actually need a principal Chief Constable with leadership skills to lead us, not to manage us. We have the different ranks and the staff associations and the staff ranks there. We can manage, but we need leadership, because leadership will set the direction for the organisation for the next 10 years.
Let's turn to Bob Stewart.
Can I just say, like everyone else in this committee, we have the deepest respect for the police in Northern Ireland. Personally, I've worked with them on and off over the years, particularly in 1978. And Jerry, Mr. Murray, Superintendent Murray, you have my deepest respect for the courage you've shown. Joining the Royal Ulster Constabulary in 1973 at the height of the Troubles must have been a singular act of courage. But all police officers show courage in Northern Ireland, frankly, and I've seen that, and I've always had an incredible respect for that, because we in the military were always much more protected than you guys were. That said, you've actually answered the broad question, but I'm specifically going to ask two questions. Do we know yet how many staff have requested to move to another area or leave the PSNI as a result of recent developments, and how are they being looked after, their worries being cared for, such as sort of meetings with them and emails, or are we too early there? But are you seeing the first signs of this recent troubles having an impact on retention? I don't know who I should ask. Perhaps you, Superintendent Murray, to start with.
From our membership there, yes, I can categorically say we've one officer who is now resigning. It just has put so much pressure on his family. He's a young officer, young family, and he has now decided to leave the organisation. We because of the data leak, we have Catholic officers who have gone to left their home and have gone to live with, during the present situation, live with their in-laws, their parents. But there's no threat. I mean, we're all under it, as Anthony and Liam have said. Everyone, staff or police, we're all under some sort of threat. Others take it very serious. Others, like myself, we've lived with it so long, we just endure it. But it is difficult at this time to see what the retention will be in 6 to 12 months. We're in the phase of just looking where we are now, how we're going to get over this, and this may take years.
I think it will. Particularly concerned that police officers still having to check under their cars, for instance. That really is such a chore, actually, and frightening, because when you're living with your family, have you done it right? Have you checked properly? Are you blasé about it? All that stuff. So, can I ask anyone else, are there moves to reassure, Ms. Godfrey, maybe you could answer, are there moves to actually try and help people who are deeply concerned? Because clearly, what you've all said, there is huge concern.
Yeah. Just to say that we also check under our cars. The 2,500 of us, we also check under our cars as police staff. The impact about retention is, I think most people, there was little recruitment into police staff roles during the Troubles. You tended to just drift into it because you ticked a box on a form to say you were joining the civil service. But the younger people who have joined, I would say post Good Friday Agreement, they have mostly been contacting me. They are absolutely horrified that they are in a job that could, risk their own security, and because of their age and their qualifications, they're more than likely to jump ship and go to other roles. Older people like myself, we don't really have another option. We've done it for so long, so we'll probably just stick with it. But as far as support, yes, you can get support. It is offered through ACC Todd's group. I just think that some police staff, as well as police officers who have unusual surnames, feel particularly vulnerable, and they, some of them are off sick at present. The police staff sickness is completely different to police officer sickness and how it's calculated and how you're paid. I have one lady who went through cancer treatment and now is off, and she's on no pay through the data breach. So that's the impact it's having on people. She needs more reassurance, she needs support, and she's seeking it and she's getting it, but at the moment she doesn't feel comfortable enough to come back to work.
Moving families and so on is the crucial, and you can't just do that.
No.
Mr. Kelly, can I just ask for your view?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stewart. The starting point in the police regulations, if someone wants to resign from service, they have to give the organisation a calendar month's notice. So the data around that may be forward-facing as opposed to the here and now, but certainly anecdotally we have a number of officers have approached us who are indicating that they are leaving service. Unfortunately, in relation to leaving service, that's managed by PSNI themselves, and it's a voluntary whether the officer wants to give the reasons why they're leaving or not leaving. And I mean, we've had a problem with retention anyway for a considerable period of time. stemming from COVID onwards, where basically because of the pay and conditions, officers were finding, I don't want to do this anymore. The terrorist attacks on our colleagues in Derry City and Strabane in November of last year, and then right through to the absolutely ridiculous attempted murder of Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell in February, has also left a number of officers questioning, why am I doing this? I thought that those days were behind us, and we're now seem to be back into that again. So that's the here and now for where we will see what will actually happen. Again, as far as I am aware, I don't believe any officers have been subject to the special purchase of evacuated dwellings process, where they've been necessitated through an intelligence process and evidential process that they have to move home. But as Superintendent Murray has highlighted there are a number of officers who are taking that decision themselves because they're that concerned with what it is. As part of as the Senior Information Risk Owner for the organisation, ACC Todd has set up, which is a welfare wellbeing strategy support network, and through that there's this emergency threat assessment group. This is what Ms Govray has referred to, and Mr Todd will give you some more figures and more detail around this. But as I understand it, there's 3,700 officers and staff have went through that process of raising concerns individually, internally with the PSNI, and of that 3,700, 800 of them are graded as red in the traffic light system, as needing immediate attention. Now that's not an evidential base that there's a higher risk associated with that, and Mr Todd will explain the process of what that is. That's individuals' personal concerns that as a result of what has happened here with us, that they feel particularly vulnerable and scared with where it is. And so that's the sort of numbers you're talking about of people in service.
That's huge. DCS McNally, it's not just, they're still under threat when they leave, because terrorists say, your history, you've been with the Royal Ulster Constabulary, George Cross, or the Northern Ireland Police Service, you served, and they will count, that counts. So just leaving they're still under threat, and therefore they require people to be aware of them, the police service to be aware of them, and to provide protection for them, even though they have left the service. You're all nodding, so I presume the answer is yes, that's right. And we're up against time, and I'm turning back to the chairman and saying, I should shut up now.
No, you're fine. Right. Anybody else want to? Mr Farry, you wanted to
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to our witnesses. Just to follow on from Mr Stewart's questions, I'll run this all together in the interest of time. At the time of the data breach, obviously there were issues around the need to communicate very quickly to officers around what had happened. I think all of us, especially those elected reps in Northern Ireland, have heard stories, complaints about that not working effectively. And are you satisfied that's now been addressed? More generally, how are the lines of communication going at present? Are staff members, both uniformed and civilian staff members, happy with how line managers are now communicating around those particular issues whenever concerns are being raised? I'm conscious Mr Kelly made reference to SPED, and I wonder in particular if you could address, is SPED as currently designed fit for purpose? Do you have concerns around how that's going to work, particularly around how the qualification for entry to that's going to be managed? Obviously you said, I don't think anyone's gone through it just yet, but you've also mentioned 3,700 people raising concerns, 800 red flags, so it is likely that may be used. And in terms of the current financial crunch, if it proves necessary to move people through SPED, is there a resource there to facilitate, particularly if that has to happen with considerable numbers? Maybe turn to Mr Kelly first and then move down the panel.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to the SPED, it's an intelligence and evidence-led process. The issue that some of the officers have, particularly following the attack on DCI John Caldwell, was that our intelligence systems didn't pick up that attack was going to happen. So clearly there's a concern that there is an intelligence gap as part of this process with where it is. As to whether or not it's fit for purpose at time, I mean, it's a quite intrusive. It's not, as you know, it's not within the domain of solely for police officers. It's for the entire population of Northern Ireland as to how it works. And we've had previous issues in the past around negative equity and other things. So police officers being told that they have to move location and finding themselves left with significant mortgages for properties that they're no longer able to live in through no fault of their own. So yeah, I mean, we've tried to address those in the past with PSNI, and they've been quite responsive, although it's been taking a considerable period of time to get to that position. So in relation to SPADE, I think it is currently, as it stands, fit for purpose, but clearly it could be better and happen faster for our officers that are there if they need to access that facility.
Are you happy the resources would be there if it's required for officers?
Well, that's the thing. Again, you've mentioned communications.
Yeah.
I'd sort of a list down here, a good, bad scenario. Communications in my mind have been quite good. And Mr. Todd will explain this about how they've consolidated all the information into one sort of central repository in the police internet system where officers can go. There's a frequently asked questions section in there. However, the data that the organisation can see, and audited data that they can see of people using that facility, is it's not being used enough. So therefore the criticism then levels is, are we doing enough to do that? And there are some plans in place to try and increase the accessibility of that. So for example, if you're a police officer who's on sickness absence, or a police staff member who's at home and has no access to a police computer system, how can you be updated? Is it solely the responsibility of your line management when things are fast changing and moving at such a regular basis? The initial information around this was causing a bit of confusion with officers. There were too many people sending too many emails, and the general messaging was getting lost in the ether, which is why, again, and I praise Mr. Todd for doing this, is that the process needed to change to consolidate that into one particular area where the lessons that they were learning in the earliest days of this were captured. The questions that officers were asking, a lot of them were repetitive, and they could try to allay what some of those concerns were. So the comms are good, but could be better.
I'll move quickly along the panel. Conscious Superintendent Murray, representing the Catholic Officers Guild, that there may be a disproportionate impact on Catholic officers of a Catholic background in this regard, as well as those working in intelligence and security areas.
It is. I mean, the security branch within Operational Support Department actually is a small team that manages SPADE. If you look at the history in the last 10 to 15 years, Catholic officers and staff appear to be the main target, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to undermine the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. This is what this is all about, by this minority of people who don't wish to move forward like the rest of us do. So obviously the emphasis on now that the systems are in place for either SPADE or for the Key Persons Protection System is fit for purpose. Now, if it was to be overloaded, we would probably have to review it ASAP. But at the moment, as Mr. Kelly has said, it is fit for purpose. But if the threat, risk and harm were to increase, and it would be at one particular section of our community within policing or anywhere in Northern Ireland, we may have a difficulty.
DCS McNally, Discovery.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but you specifically mentioned the question around stress on line managers, and there's no doubt this is stressful for line managers. They're already very busy people at all ranks and grades. So there is that real need to make sure that there's absolute clarity on where their role is clearly defined in this, as my colleagues have said, for those who are often sick and those who are, and for example, if a line manager themselves takes a period of leave, who steps in and does their job? All of those things need to be worked through. But I think, to be fair to the gold structures that are in place, this is still early days, and I have every confidence those will be worked through. But as been said, I think the comms are good, but there's still work to do.
I would agree the comms are very good, but I do think that it's line managers who are struggling to cope with it all. I spoke to a person who had to make 35 phone calls about this one thing. That's a lot. So that's just a difficult thing. Talking about SPAB, I was dealing with a lady who in Dungiven had to have the protection put in around her home, and I have to say that our security branch were great. But the problem was, the sticking point was with the NIO, the slowness. We had to meet with them, and it was just terrible. And if that's what the impact's going to be on a larger scale, I dread to think what the outcome's going to be.
That's a useful comment there. I just reinforces, Chair, why this is not purely a devolved matter. There are rules here for the Northern Ireland office.
No, that's a point well made. Let's turn now, please, to Colin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel as well for coming for us today. Probably the first couple of questions, probably Liam and Tracy, and then Superintendent Murray following that. The morale in the service, you said, is obviously at an all-time low. And in terms of rank and file officers, I suppose those are the people that are in contact with me probably more regularly. And they are really, really distressed. They are concerned. They are, I would say some of them are living life right on the edge. And I suppose I'm just keen to know what your thoughts are, what can be done in the short term to really support and help those officers and to regain the support that the police service is a good employer.
Well, I think the first thing around this is the organisation is trying to do a welfare, well-being wraparound for its staff, which is important, and to provide them with reassurance where reassurance is required. The difficulty that they have in managing that is, again, goes back to the budget and the availability of finances to do that. And what I mean by that, particularly around psychological resilience that could be required, or intervention around psychological support. As things stand at the moment with our occupational health, they do not have the budget to cope as things stand. This here has just added to it. So therefore the waiting times, it'll go through exactly the same process as the emerging threat assessment group. People will be graded on the traffic light system of red, amber and green in relation to their need. However, even in the red category, for somebody that needs immediate access or as fast access as possible through that system, is delayed because of the amount of people we have employed in service who are either providing psychiatric support or assistance or nursing support with what it is. And unfortunately the fallback on that is and the service is not the primary healthcare provider, it's the NHS, it's our local GPs, and they're stressed to the hilt too, numbers wise as well. So unfortunately what that manifests itself in is higher levels of sickness absence in service, which again leaves those that are left behind to deal with more and more pressure with where it is. And again, at one point, I mean, on average per day in PSNI, there's between 450 and 500 officers on some form of sickness absence, short, medium, long term. And the week following this data breach incident, that number was over 800. And bearing in mind our service numbers are sitting around less than 6,600. That's a massive number of people not available to come forward. And then those who have suffered other injuries, what I mean by physical injuries, we had nearly 1,000 officers on some form of duty restriction as well. So the squeeze is coming in here, at just making it more and more difficult. There are officers who have decided, I can't do this anymore, I need to be at home, I need to be at home to look after my family or to look after our relatives with where it is. So the squeeze is on there. What can the service do more of it? The service are committed to try and assist, but they're being hamstrung by the fact they haven't got a budget to deal with this. That's the reality, the harsh reality.
So the message from today is the Secretary of State needs to act with regards to a budget for the police service, because we hear the mantra that if Storm was back up and running, this would all be fixed, and there'd be a silver bullet. It's not the case because the money's not there in the current budget, never mind.
Well, I mean, PSNI started this year with a financial black hole of some 140 million, and as a result of the implementation from our senior executive team, they had managed to get that down to less than 40 million. And then we had pay awards, inflation, utilities all came into play. We have the cost of this, we had the cost of the visit of President Biden and others around the Good Friday Agreement, where PSNI were being left to pick that up, even though it was additionality. So yeah, I mean, and I'm on record of asking the Secretary of State that he needed to look at the budget and to provide more money for, not only for policing, but for the block grant for our entire country, because education, health, all of us can sit and make the same arguments. But the reality for me, and being an advocate for policing, if policing fails, I don't know where Northern Ireland's going to go, and that's the harsh reality. If our NHS fails and our education system fails, there are mechanisms that can be brought into play to assist with that. There's nobody can replace the police officers if they're not there. That's the harsh reality, and having no recruitment and a difficulty with retention, that's just going to get worse as things go forward here.
Okay. And Ms. Godfrey, in terms of staff, is there anything short term that you think?
Well, you have to remember that the police staff are the poorest paid in the whole organisation, and a lot of them actually would have had second jobs to make ends meet, and they're concerned because they don't feel safe doing that anymore, or they can't apply for it. A lot of people have been contacting me about the possibility of having some kind of like a Ring doorbell, that kind of thing in their home, that would sort of make them feel a bit more comfortable. But again, going back to parity and equality, we are not paid the right amount of danger money. and that does not help police staff morale. So we do the same jobs in a lot of cases, and we're not recognised in the same way as far as threat. I think that this whole data breach has just highlighted that what we've been saying for years is the case. We're under as much threat as everybody else.
Okay. And in relation then to just a full independent investigation into the police service and how it delivers its statutory duties to officers and staff, do you feel that would be beneficial going forward? Probably Liam. Apologies, you're getting the...
Yes, absolutely. Again, I think this has provided an opportunity to have that deep dive, but it's relating to concerns that we have all had over time with this, that we seem to have been sort of treading water on this, and the organisation haven't hid behind the fact that they're shrinking, that they haven't got the initial financial support, but some of the mechanisms and some of the culture internally just hasn't been up to standard, and we've had this position as instead of being led, we're being managed, and not managed particularly well by the people who are entrusted to lead our organisation and to set the standard for everyone that goes below that. So, I mean, paying lip service to a lot of things without actually providing the end delivery, both for our people and the people that we serve.
And ultimately it takes the money, and I do think, Chair, it would be important for this committee, with obviously your say so, to actually contact the NIO, because I know I have several cases ongoing at the moment where officers or retired officers are awaiting security measures, and there is severe delays and hold-ups, particularly around windows.
It's the windows,
and
yeah.
window replacements. So I think
Let's agree that we will write to the Secretary of State today on that issue.
okay. And very finally, this is around the recruitment and the concerns, Superintendent Murray, that you had highlighted around Catholic people coming into the force and feeling safe, etc., etc. What would be your analysis of, say, the public reaction and revelations in recent days from Michelle O'Neill and other Sinn Féin reps to the Ormeau Road issue? Is that having a detrimental impact where political leaders are creating a narrative that stops people from a Catholic background actually joining the PSNI?
I believe we're at a defining moment in policing within Northern Ireland, and I believe that politicians coming from Catholic, nationalist, Republican have to step up to the mark, and they have to be seen, and also other politicians. What we need within Northern Ireland is there is a small minority of people who wish to push us back. There are sufficient people who are influencers, who are negotiators, who are politicians, who can bring this forward if they're prepared to stand up and speak out. And with regards to the Catholic community, the National Community, Republican community, have people coming forward. The politicians on the Nationalist, Republican and Catholic should be coming and supporting not only the police and police staff, but the families that are left behind in those areas where they may be susceptible. There has to be something in place that when a Catholic staff or Catholic police officer comes forward into this organisation, that they know that their politicians, that their leaders will be there supporting their family in that area.
How damaging has the Ormeau Road incident and the revelations around that, particularly with Michelle O'Neill and Sinn Féin, you know, how impactful is that on a...
We're looking for it. When you look at the Catholic Police Guild are looking for solutions. We're at this particular time, this junction, we have to move forward, and whatever has happened in the past will be regulated and will be investigated and will be resolved through recommendations. What I want from our people is going forward, and everyone, this affects everyone in Northern Ireland. Through this data leak, we all are victims, and we need solutions to a situation that is far outside our control.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Claire Hanna.
Thank you very much. And just to add to, as the Chair and others have said, just to put on record, thanks to you and all of the staff and officers you represent. I think it's very clear that it's a brave and difficult thing to do every day, even leaving aside the political context, just the intensity and the complexity of the cases. And I think all of us as elected representatives know how often we have to call on the police for advice and guidance, and we know that is increasingly difficult, and the context of budget cuts and falling numbers, and that is all the more demoralising, and all that has gone on for the last few days. And also want to say on a personal note to Simon Byrne as well, it is an impossibly tough gig. I can imagine as Chief Constable it was the right thing to go, but obviously he put himself out over years as well. I wanted to ask about the level of confidence among those you represent in the wider PSNI leadership, and what can be done to address this. Could I start with you, Mr. Kelly?
Yes, thank you. As sort of I'm on record as saying, we have an executive committee who are meeting tomorrow, and one of the matters that's been tabled from what's termed our regional boards around this, which is representatives from different parts of Northern Ireland and different departments, as they want to have that discussion. And say from my own perspective, I contacted the Deputy Chief Constable last night, and I invited him to come along to that meeting, because I think it's important. And to be fair to the Chief Constable and ACC Todd, after the data breach, I invited for both of them immediately after the policing board meeting to come to our executive committee, and they did. And they answered the questions, queries, concerns that were raised with him directly. So I'm pleased to say that the Deputy has considered that request and will be coming to speak to our Executive Committee tomorrow. And that will help our officers to raise what the concerns on the leadership are. And then ultimately, as an association, we will take a position what way it will be going forward. So I'm not willing to say what that is at the moment, because I don't know until following that meeting.
You said that the recent High Court judgment called into question decision making right up the chain. Do you think that there are changes that can be made to that decision making that can, regain and rebuild officer trust?
Yeah, I have to say that. I mean, it's the reality is the status quo cannot remain. We are at a defining moment in policing. The reality is now is how the organisation can help to heal itself around this. And prior to the Thursday of last week, the Chief Constable had a small window of opportunity. I'm on record as saying that his future as our Chief Constable at that time was questionable, but following the revelations of the Policing Board last Thursday, it became untenable at that position. Really what that is, as police officers, our core duty is to uphold the law. And for our Chief Constable to be found by a court to have not upheld the law left him and the senior executive's position up in the air. But the fact that he'd accepted that decision and then decided not, or potentially not to accept it, in my mind, he's crossed the Rubicon on that. There was no coming back from that, in my view, which is why I had to be as strong as I was when I had spoke around that. So yeah, there is an opportunity here for our organisation to help the rebuild, and it's not just internal rebuild, because that trust that our rank and file officers have in our senior executive team has been badly damaged, if not broken, by some of this and other revelations that have happened over the last number of months and years. But their opportunity is there to fix that, and it starts with appointing a new leader in the organisation, and then seeing that, as I've mentioned, the significant investment that's going to be required in policing to allow us to grow, to go back to the new decade, new approach commitments as a minimum starting point. I mean, we were supposed to have 7,500 police officers as a starting point, and a proper cadre of police support staff to assist with that. That never happened, and in fact, we're going the other way. We're going backwards, and backwards at quite a rapid rate. And I mean, the amount of officers leaving service this year alone is already ahead of what the organisation had projected over the entire year. And after what's happened in this data breach and what's happened last week, do I think that number is going to exponentially rise? Yes, I do, because that's the harsh reality that we find ourselves in. People coming to me saying, I've been in the policing, and our family have been involved in policing for a long, long time. I'm embarrassed to be in the police service, is what they're telling me at the moment. And we need to fix this, and I'm telling that people, we need the good people in service to now stand up and not leave us behind. We need those people to help rebuild and go forward. And that's the starting point. As I say, our federation stand ready to assist new leadership and our current leadership as it stands to start that process and rebuilding what's required, because if policing fails, our whole society fails, in my view.
Right. You called for an inquiry into the Ormer Road incident and the issues that followed leading up to the High Court judgment. Have you got concerns about political interference in policing matters?
Well, I mean, I think I have to, as a result of what Judge McCloskey found in the process, as a result of the testimony from both the Chief Constable and the Deputy Chief Constable in the process. So, yeah, I mean, and I've been candid on that too. It's not just political pressure from parties within Northern Ireland. There's also information that would suggest that our Department of Justice was involved in conversations, that our Irish government was potentially involved in conversations as well. At the end of the day, the decisions around, and I'll not focus on that particular incident in totality, but operational matters are the sole responsibility of the organisation. Of course they can liaise, and quite rightly they can liaise with whoever they want, but it's ultimately their decision, and they have to do that without fear or favour and manage the consequences of whatever that may be. You can't please everyone all the time, is the reality. But as long as you do that from a position of integrity and credibility, in my mind, there should be nothing wrong with that, and you move on, and you move on to the next matter that comes to the fore. And unfortunately, we get this, and as we've had over a long period of time, of it becomes a tribal, it becomes a green and orange issue, and it should never be about that. It should never be about that. This is about policing credibility. It's about policing having the ability to do their job, which is, as I say, central tenet is to uphold the laws of this country and keep our society safe. They should be allowed to do that without pressure being put on them whatsoever.
So can I clarify that you believe beyond the normal engagement between political representatives, you believe that there are parties and actors trying to use influence and potentially threat of withdrawal to steer operational decisions
I would be,
as separate to achieving accountability?
Yeah, I would be amazed if it's not there, which again, the reason that we took the judicial review against the Chief Constable on that thing was because that is what we suspected, and that's what we were being told. That was the basis of, and that was the only point that we won in that judicial review as a result of the declarations in the day books of both the Deputy Chief Constable and the Chief Constable. It's there in black and white. That's an irrefutable fact from their position of where they are. And I suppose the answer in relation to the further investigation, has this happened before, and if so, when? Again, that's what an investigation could shine a light into that. I've no doubt, and again, it's about that perception. Our officers have a perception that there's a different levels of accountability in relation to the imposition of regulations and disciplinary processes. The higher you are up the organisation, the better ability is that it's a learning outcome if you make a mistake. If you're a rank and file officer, the problem with it is you're effectively thrown under the bus by the organisation and punitively punished for things, in all honesty, in my mind, are never there. In this particular case, we had an officer suspended when the evidence being placed in front of them, and even the Deputy Chief Constable himself has said that he was not in a position to think that, despite all the furore that was going on at the time, that he wasn't able to make that call, that it was that serious, it needed suspension. He was put into that position by the Chief Constable, and unfortunately he ruined it, and that'll come out as part of the investigation. But Justice McCloskey's clear on that one. That's why the judicial review went in our favour.
And just finally on this, do you believe that the policing board is an adequate scrutiny mechanism in its current form, and is the relationship between the DOJ and the PSNI appropriately managed at the moment?
Well, I mean, and I welcome the comments yesterday from Deirdre Trono, the chair of the policing board, around asking the Department of Justice to do a deep dive into what the involvement of the board was or wasn't as part of this particular incident. But overall, yes, I mean, at times the purpose of the policing board is to hold the Chief Constable and senior officers to account, and we really haven't, as a staff association, we really haven't seen that manifesting itself in reality on day-to-day policing. We're seeing, and I'll go back to other incidents which Mr Shannon had sort of raised there as well, around the Bobby Story funeral, the Black Lives Matter protest. as a result of those incidents and what happened, what we were seeing was it was actually the junior officers in service were the ones seemed to be getting held to account for things that had happened in those particular scenarios, where the decision makers and the people who were setting the strategy and the standards seemed to be that it was an occupational hazard for them, but they would learn from it and we move on to the next incident. To me that's wrong. Wrongdoing is wrongdoing, and it needs to be dealt with appropriately and transparently as well as part of this process. And this is not about a them and us scenario. It should never be a them and us scenario. Collectively, we should be able to work holistically as one organisation, and that starts from the top coming down. And equally, as I said before, I had a good working relationship with our senior executive team, Chief Constable, Deputy and Assistant Chief Constables around this process. However, I wasn't confident at every time that our concerns were being listened to and acted upon in a candid way. And unfortunately that's the reality.
Thank you. Superintendent Murray, you spoke a couple of moments ago about being at a sort of a decision point or an inflection point in terms of policing. I just wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on the recruitment and retention and promotion of officers from a Catholic background at the moment, in general and in light of the last month or two? And are there working environment or culture issues that can be adopted to address this?
If I could just mention one issue that the chair from the Federation, the members that I speak for, they're frightened externally, but they're also frightened internally, because if they make a genuine mistake, it should be a genuine mistake, but they're served with a Regulation 16 automatically, nearly for gross misconduct. And what there should be within the organisation, especially from Professional Standards Department internally, and the chair from Federation alluded to. We have young officers with very little experience, frontline policing. First 2 years of their probation, they're out on the ground. Their first line manager is young in service, second line manager young in service, and yet they make a genuine mistake. And professional standards talk about learning, that there's a learning. There's very little learning. You're automatically nearly through the process of guilty before being proved innocent. And going on to talk about recruitment intention. Retention, we will probably be able to sustain what we have, as the NIPSA head said, it's mentioned there. A lot of us are so far into a mortgage, so far into a career. Those that are just on the first rung of the ladder, who are mobile, who have degrees and have the ability to move, will move. But recruitment will be a major issue within this organisation. Recruitment of specifically from Catholic staff and Catholic recruitment. Even before this data leak, we're only running at 19% of civil servant staff from a Catholic background. The other aspect is, if you look at the ranks from superintendent to chief constable, the Catholic representation is in around 17-18%. In fact, just before we went from our Royal Ulster Constabulary to Police Service of Northern Ireland, I think it was in around about 18%. So in 22 years, either we're not getting the right recruits, but actually we are. But there doesn't seem to be a clear path of recruitment for Catholic staff and Catholic police officers within the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And they're very able, willing candidates who are at constable and sergeant level, who in 10 years with acceleration could make within the 1% of the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
And are there changes that you think can be made? I mean, obviously there are the wider cultural issues and just the societal drag that's slowing down, but are there organisational, environmental changes, maybe around support services that can be put in place to help those particular officers? I mean, all officers, but those to realise the potential and for policing to properly reflect the society we're living in.
One of the reasons why the Catholic Guild was formed, because we're trying to establish and develop mentoring within it. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is to support young Catholic staff and officer, but we're also trying to do a mentoring. So we put them into a position where they will be able to follow through in the organisation. And it may be that at certain aspects, and the chair of the Federation might think I'm callous, but we may have to go to direct recruitment at Chief Inspector, Inspector and Superintendent to get the right calibre at an earlier stage as opposed to 10 years later.
Thank you very much. Just in the interest of time, DCS O'Connelly and Ms. Godfrey, I just wanted, if there are any other issues you wanted to add on top of that. For example, you know, I think somebody had touched on the issue of occupational health, and I'm aware myself of people who've had to go to their own GPs to get support that traditionally would have been available. And on a lighter note, we were big fans of blue lights in this committee at a time. Do you think it has been helpful in terms of portraying the complexities of being a police officer in Northern Ireland?
I actually think that, you know, we can't. A lot of my members can't afford private health insurance, so you really are up against trying to get into the NHS. And with the backlog in PSNI, it's just really difficult. You know, they feel a bit let down, and they keep on going to work. Most of them. That just shows their pride in public service. But we do need some help there with our own occupational health and welfare.
I'm conscious that a number of the recent questions have been asked to my panel colleagues, so I feel it would be remiss of me not to speak up on behalf of my own association, who are senior leaders within the organisations within their own right, and I think that's important to reflect. From our perspective, in terms of our senior executive team colleagues, being close to them, we recognise the difficult job they have to do, the challenges that we've been through in the past few years around COVID, budget settlements, no government, etc. So the job of the senior executive team is very, very difficult. We put that on record that we support them through those challenges. But that said, confidence has been damaged, not just in the past few weeks, but over recent months and years. We do feel that there has been a drift. There has been a disengagement. We do not have structured forums that we had in place a number of years ago. That those have sort of withered on the vine, to use that language. So again, as per my statement last night, we very much welcome the opportunity to repair that relationship, rebuild it, because ultimately, as I said in my opening gambit, from my perspective, the Superintendents Association, what we want to do is get back to what we're here for. The public are suffering, victims are suffering, while we all spend time debating and discussing these issues. We want to get back to our core responsibility of protecting vulnerable people, protecting Northern Ireland and keeping people safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Caldwell, you wanted to come in briefly, I
just
think.
very quickly.
And then I'm going to turn to Robert Backlund.
Yeah, Mr. Kelly, you had said throughout the course a couple of times in relation to the senior leadership, particularly Chief Con and DCC. Obviously, given the judgment and the quite revealing issues around two-tier policing and political interference, now that the Chief Constable has gone, we have a DCC who has stepped up. What's the mood music in terms of your rank and file with regards to that step up? Because surely, the two are one in all of this. So just keen to understand where people are at with regards to that particular move of the policing board with regards to the step up.
Yeah, well, one of the things I clarified with the deputy himself around this is he hasn't been temporarily promoted to be the Chief Constable of our organisation. He retains his position as Deputy Chief Constable. What the policing board have navigated and agreed with him is that in the absence of having a Chief Constable, that he can exercise some of the legislative and statutory responsibilities on behalf of the Chief Constable. So he has in other words, and I'll give you a very basic example, when the Chief Constable was on holidays and the Deputy was the person carrying the reins, the reality around that is he has the authority to sign off on particular things on behalf of that office. So I think it would have been a retrograde state if he had actually been temporarily promoted, but that hasn't happened. With that, and as I've already mentioned, our committee tomorrow will be hearing from him in person, where our concerns and in relation to his position in service will clearly be being discussed with him, and also when he's not there as well.
Because I know there is a lot of concern out there with regards to that position as well, and particularly the Ormeau Road incident and what all happened there. So, thank you.
May I just add, please, before we finish, Chair? Just you raised the point quite early in the conversation, which was answered by the Federation, and I just want to echo my support for it. In that, whilst you asked the question around should we take our time and get the right replacement. Yes, of course we should, but I also feel that we need an interim solution, very much so, even just from an operational perspective.
Yes.
To not operate without a Chief Constable for any period of time, be that over a couple of weeks, is unsustainable due to the operational commitments, particularly when there requires specific authorisations and so on. That just for me is untenable, and we need to have
an acting Chief Constable rather than a...
Well, yeah, if that's what's required until such times as an appointment could take place, which I assume it would be, but my preference and our preference would be we have a Chief Constable in some capacity as soon as possible.
Robert, you've indicated that your information has been elicited through other
Yes, I think
means.
so.
So
I think so.
that might... Mary, did you?
Yeah. I was just going to come in on that
Yes.
that issue. I just, Mr. Kelly, you've made it quite clear that police officers are feeling more than disappointed about the pay awards in recent years, and that it's going to be difficult to retain police now, and that they feel very let down and disrespected. I'm presuming now you will expect to see a number of officers leaving the service given this data breach. What is your message from those police officers to the government and to the executive in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and thanks for the question. I think the reality around this is that we need government and political support to enable us to have the proper resource and tools to provide the function that we're required to do as a police service in Northern Ireland. And I hate reverting back all the time about budget, but budget's key on this. Without a budget, we can't recruit people. Without a budget, we can't pay our people effectively. I mean, we have, over a long period of time, have had a parity of pay scales with England and Wales. But as things stand at the moment, we're not getting the pay rise that England and Wales have got because PSNI hasn't got the budget to pay it. So the reality for our officers who are looking across at their colleagues in other parts of the United Kingdom or even over the border and with our Garda Síochána is they could effectively become the worst paid police officers in the entire UK. But conversely, the very police officers who are facing the highest threat level against them, which is just perverse. And again, I have raised this in correspondence with the Secretary of State. And I mean, I'm on record as saying he's had 3 opportunities to have some discussions with the Federation, and each time he has declined to do so, which I just think is incredible in that position. He says he hears what our concerns are, but he actually won't physically meet with me, nor have any of his officials, since Mr. Heaton Harris has been appointed as our Secretary of State. And I think that's a very sad state of affairs.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. I think that takes us neatly to the end of this panel. I think we would welcome, if you have any thoughts, clearly wrapped into this, a review of the policing board as well. And any thoughts that any of the 4 of you have on that, we would very gratefully receive in writing if you want to submit those to us in due course. I suppose just in closing this particular session, a few observations. It's the big things which attract the headlines, isn't it? But resignation of a Chief Constable and a massive data breach. I think what you've rather soberly brought to all of our attention and crystallised very clearly is the enormous impact both in terms of those who are in the employ of the PSNI, but also the potential damage to the future of the PSNI in terms of recruitment, retention, and facing into criminality. The other thing which you've all mentioned in various degrees and in various ways is actually the acute sadness that here we are. If this was the Dorset Constabulary and an FOI request had been made and that sort of scale of data breach had been committed, it would be as serious. But the ramifications in the Northern Irish context are so massive that it is a sadness that is still the case. And I take the point entirely that I think a number of you have mentioned that the leaderships of political parties in both traditions need to now speak up very clearly in support of the work of the PSNI and the fact that the officers and the support staff of the PSNI are off limits, if you will, in terms of intimidation and other forms of criminality, because we cannot see a situation whereby people who are going about the job of enforcing the law feel themselves threatened and very vulnerable to threat and attack, etc. This is clearly going to run on. Please feel free to keep us informed. We as a committee stand ready, as I said in opening remarks, to continue our oversight of this, given the seriousness and the importance. But it's just another thing, and I suppose I close with this, I suppose, as an observation, but as an open-ended question. Whilst it wouldn't be provide all of the solutions, my hunch is that whilst the NIO and this committee and Westminster in general stands ready to do what it can, when it can, how it can, this very difficult situation would be so much better managed politically down on the ground in Stormont, would it not, with a functioning executive, with MLAs asking the questions, leading the reviews, getting involved, trying to shape things for the better. I throw that out there as maybe a rhetorical observation, but it's another cri de coeur, as it were, for those to get back into Stormont, to get an executive up and running, because this is another area of service which looks like it's going in completely an unacceptable and very undesirable direction as a result of the failure of devolution. Is that a fair...
Well, I mean, I think I'm on record for some time now saying my preference would be if our government was in force, and that allows me, as an advocate for policing internally in Northern Ireland, to have those conversations with our elected representatives around what it is. It's not that I can't have conversations with our elected representatives as it is now, but the outworkings of what can actually happen with that.
They're pretty pointless.
You know, and I'll refer back to the Secretary of State. You know, first letter of concern when I wrote to him about the budget and things was, well, the budget's a devolved matter. The second response I got was, take it up with your permanent secretary, because I've given him the powers now to do that. So in other words, it's not my problem anymore. I've given him the money, have the discussions there. But the permanent secretary is in the position that I've been given a budget that's inadequate for what you need to do for us as a service. So the consequences of that are, as what we've seen with PSNI with their resource allocation model, is they're not replacing particular posts. And that may come out as part of the investigation into the data breach, is that the resource that was actually there in dealing with this maybe was not as effective as it could have been, or the people who were in place in data protection and other areas maybe didn't have enough resource to make sure that the checks and balances were working properly. So, no, I think it's a fair comment than what you say.
Thank you very much.
Can I just say, Chair, that from the point of view is that the legislative members of our Assembly feel our pain, and they know that the police officers, police staff are from their communities, and with that, if the government was in-house, operational, they would know from their communities what needs to be done to put this right.
There's no doubt devolved government is what we require, and we'd very much like to see that, but at the same time what we don't want is hamstrung politicians who can't deliver because of the budget settlement. So Westminster equally has an important role of this as our local politicians.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree. We need government back, local government back for all our public sector sections in Northern Ireland. It's just grinding to a halt, and to ask people now to consider scrapping free public transport for people over 60, talk about increasing school meals, water charges, prescription charges. It's just biting the people who don't have the money to pay for it.
Thank you. Can I just ask a favour of the four of you? Would you take back to your memberships on behalf of this committee our thanks, our admiration and our support and our commitment that as a group, as we will do the best that we can to ensure that this issue is not forgotten, that the lessons are learned and implemented, and that their safety is absolutely paramount. But as always, we thank you for your attendance, for taking our questions, and we thank all of you and your members for your service to the good folk of Northern Ireland. Thank you. I now ask you to grab your name badges, or this is where stage management now comes in, which we do live in front of the glare. Paulina's going to do that. And it's with pleasure I invite Assistant Chief Constable Chris Todd of the PSNI to join us.
Good morning, everybody.
Mr. Todd, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Don't feel like Daniel in the lion's den. We understand entirely the circumstances whereby you are. Somebody's got to say it. You're on your Todd, but we're grateful to you for coming before us this morning. You've asked, and I've agreed that you'll make an opening statement to the committee. We will then have our questions for you. And I'm grateful that you came in for the earlier session so you could hear both the level and depth of concerns of colleagues on this side of the table, but also the views of our previous witnesses.
Indeed.
The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, members, thank you all for the invitation to be here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to publicly address this very serious matter with you. Before I begin, you will of course be aware of the Chief Constable's resignation yesterday, and that the Chief Constable had been due to appear before you himself. I'm grateful for the words that you've shared with us this morning, and I share my gratitude to Mr Byrne for his service and the support he's personally shown to me. I'd like to assure you, therefore, that I am a member of the Police Service Senior Executive Team. I'm its Senior Information Risk Owner and Gold Commander for Operation Sanyakite, which is our response to the recent data leak. This issue falls firmly within my professional portfolio, and as such I believe I am well placed to answer the committee's questions today, notwithstanding the absence of the Chief Constable. My senior colleagues and I are convinced of the importance of continuing the business of policing. In particular, we were determined to take this opportunity to publicly address this extremely serious matter with you here today. Thank you again for that opportunity. As you know, the Police Service of Northern Ireland is currently responding to 3 recent data breaches. The most serious of these occurred on the 8th of August, when our response to a legitimate Freedom of Information request inadvertently shared details of every officer and member of staff in the organisation. This workforce data set was visible on a third-party website for just under 2.5 hours. I want to start by apologising to all of my colleagues and their families for what is clearly a shocking industrial-level data breach. I'm deeply sorry that this happened. I'm deeply sorry that this happened on my watch. I do not underestimate the impact that this has had on the personal and family lives of many of my colleagues. My primary concern, and that of the entire Police Senior Executive Team, remains the safety and security of our people. Nearly 4,000 officers and staff have now made contact with our dedicated Emergency Threat Assessment Group, which was established in the wake of this breach. As you know, the police in Northern Ireland remains the target of a severe terrorist threat. Some of the information released is considered highly sensitive, such as reference to surveillance and intelligence personnel. Although it was taken down quickly, it is our assessment that this data is in the hands of dissident Republicans. They are likely to seek to use it to threaten, intimidate and attack us. Therefore, another key strand of our ongoing response is to investigate and disrupt those who hold this data and would seek to use it for criminal purposes. This is a complex investigation which has engaged specialists from a number of our security partners, and to date we have made 6 arrests, and 1 individual has been charged with possessing documents or records likely to be useful to terrorists. Indications are that this is having a chilling effect on those that would seek to use it to cause harm. We have also increased our level of operational activity. Additional security and reassurance patrols have been taking place across Northern Ireland as part of our organisational response. I want to reassure the committee that we are working around the clock to investigate this incident, communicate with our people, provide them with practical support and reassurance, and mitigate any risk to their safety and security. I hope today to provide you with a sense of the significant steps we have already taken and are planning in reaction to this event. The independent review, jointly commissioned with the Policing Board, will be an important step as we move from our immediate response into the recovery, resilience and rebuilding phase. I hope this review will provide confidence to officers and staff and assurance to the wider public that the causes of the data breach have been identified and addressed. We are grateful to Assistant Commissioner O'Doherty and his team for their expertise and assistance. We are also grateful for the wider support of government and other national agencies. This has been and will remain crucial throughout the rebuilding process. I would like to conclude my opening remarks by paying tribute to the officers and staff of the police service. I want to thank them for their continued hard work, resilience and dedication. The business of policing never stops, and they have unflinchingly continued to serve the community through what has been an incredibly challenging period for policing in Northern Ireland, and I'm personally very proud to serve alongside them all. Thank you.
ACC Todd, thank you for that. That was both heartfelt and sort of sober reflection on both what's happened and where we are, and we're grateful to you for that. You mentioned in your opening remarks the data being in the hands of dissident Republicans. Are they the only hands who are likely to hold this information? Are there concerns that those involved with paramilitary activity on the other side, who are no friends with the police because quite a lot of their activity, or most of their activity, if not all, is of a criminal nature, they have as much to gain, do they not, in a demoralising and diminishing of the police presence in Northern Ireland?
Indeed, Chair. It is our assessment that it is not just dissident Republicans that have shown an interest in this, but it's important to highlight that the greatest threat to policing is from those groups. That is the intelligence assessment which has led to the threat assessment being set at severe. And it's also important to note that the data set alone will not suffice to assist those that would seek to cause us harm. To launch those attacks in itself, it will help in the identification of individuals, of course, but the identification of officers and staff has always been of concern to us. The capability and capacity of those that seek to cause us harm has not been increased by this. It has, though, perhaps incentivised some people to try and exploit this to their advantage, of course.
I think it would be helpful, for what it's worth, to in communications not solely and singularly to reference dissident Republicans, that this is something which is causing concern across the piece. I'm going to leave Claire Hannah and Sir Robert Buckland to deal with the minutiae and the detail of the FOI situation, but I think it would be remiss of us as the start. We've had in recent days a picture painted, or a mosaic of the PSNI, of tribal and feudal War of the Roses type antagonisms between senior officers, where the buck has been passed from one to the other and scapegoating has been attempted, so on and so forth. We've heard in our earlier session of a mindset of management rather than of motivation and of leadership. We've heard of a force under-budgeted or under-resourced, with people being overworked in a very tense environment. But would lead possibly the layman to think that the PSNI as an institution is not fit for purpose. And when you overlay the certainly implied operational consultation or sign-off from politicians as to whether a chief can sanction one thing or another, and a board which appears not merely to scrutinise but be semi-detached from operational decisions, or certainly consulted on operational matters from time to time. Is that a fair assessment, or have the media blown it out of all proportion?
I think there's a number of elements in that, Chair, if I may. So, firstly, I think media narrative can sometimes, of course, be unhelpful. Trust and confidence in the rule of law is important to stabilise any society, and Northern Ireland, that means trust and confidence in the police service of Northern Ireland. So anything that undermines that is always unhelpful. But fair commentary from the press is also really important, so that we can be held to account and that we don't become complacent and we are reflective in all that we do. So it's healthy in that respect. I don't recognise an organisation that is at war with itself, to use that phrase. I don't recognise that at all. I don't recognise that in the senior leadership team. I know there has been narrative to the contrary, but I've sat in rooms with the rest of my executive team, having very collegiate and supportive conversations with each other on how we can best lead the organisation forward through these difficult times, whilst that narrative is being played out elsewhere, contrary to what's happening in the room. The budget situation is undoubtedly of concern.
So there's, to the best of your knowledge, it's a complete fabrication, if reported to be believed, that the former chief effectively said, oh, well, this was all to do with somebody else, nothing to do with me, I'm just sort of the fall guy for it all, etc. The most enormous amount of buck passing as reported at the board meeting last week. No truth in that whatsoever.
I can't comment on what was said in the board meeting last week. I was not privy to those conversations, I was not present during those conversations, and I was not serving at the time of the incident that they were discussing in that particular board meeting. I've been present at the previous board meetings, particularly relevant to the data breach. We've had 2 emergency board meetings in respect of this, and I've seen nothing but a united front from the executive team on those occasions.
I think we're probably now going to turn to how the PSNI manages FOI requests. I suppose the kernel to that question is, how on earth did this happen? But let's turn, may I turn to Robert first? Sir Robert Buckland.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is the first opportunity you've had to speak to a body of elected representatives, and therefore I think it's important that we put on the record precisely what this document was, what its nature was. As we understand it, it's an Excel spreadsheet with a number of fields and tabs. I think we're all familiar with the way Excel works, but can you explain, so that it's on the record, precisely what form this document was, and with particular reference, it seems, to the absence of any password protections on all or part of this document? Because my understanding is that it had 345,000 pieces of data covering not just police officers but people working for the service, which is 10,000 people. And you can see where I'm coming from, Assistant Chief Constable. Why on earth wasn't this password protected? But perhaps you can explain the precise nature of the document and then help us with that particular issue.
Certainly. And just a point of clarity, although there were fields of data of the magnitude that you described, it relates specifically to just under 9,500 individuals. There were some duplications, for example, which accounts for that. So in terms of the detail of how it actually happened, so this data set that was shared, it comes from one of our HR systems. It's an extracted data set which is extracted on a routine basis. It's extracted once to minimise the effort, and then it is used in a number of different ways, again to be more efficient. That's rightly or wrongly, that's the reality of how this happened.
Extracted by whom?
By colleagues within the HR department who are cleared and accredited to access that system. So the system itself was never breached. The people who accessed the system were qualified and equipped to do just that, and only they could do that. It is best practice across industry and recognised as such that when looking to manipulate data within such data sets, you don't work within the system. You extract from the system to protect the integrity of the core data, and that's what they did. It should never have gone beyond that point, is the reality. But the practice of extracting in order to manipulate the data is something which is commonplace in many places. The issue of password protection is one that undoubtedly the review team will examine in detail and will draw some recommendations about, I would anticipate.
They weren't password protected?
No, certainly it wasn't password protected when it went out from that department, but the people who accessed it would have provided an audit trail through their own password to access the system.
Right. And the original FOI question was, how many officers serve at each rank? That was the question, wasn't it?
Yes.
And unfortunately, the answer was let's throw everything at it, however inadvertent that might have been.
So the data set that was extracted, as I say, was extracted once in order to be most efficient, and then would be used for a number of different queries. The particular query in question didn't need the whole data set.
No.
So again, practices as to whether extraction should be dealt with on an individual basis will be part of the review as well.
That's what I wanted to ask you, officer, because really this question begs quite a simple answer. It's a list of all the ranks within the PSNI, and then just a number next to each rank. So Chief Constable 1, ACC, a few, and then coming down, as we know how it all works, the detective officers, other officers, and then that's all that was needed. Why wasn't that the subject then of a separately generated document? And is that what systemically doesn't happen?
Well, ultimately it was the subject of a separate document. The problem was the core data remained attached to it. So the data that would have been shared would have had very limited information and would have had no personal identifying data in there. It would have been very, very simple indeed.
That's right.
But the core data remained attached inadvertently.
It wasn't done properly.
It was not done properly, no.
There was a shortcut taken, because surely you only answer the question you're asked by FOI, which is how many officers of what rank. And that surely would have been better to have been done on a separate table, could even been done on a side of a digital side of A4, but away from the primary data. And I've got to ask the question, if it's happened here, has it happened on other occasions with perhaps data that is less sensitive, perhaps audit or accounting data, that has just been sent out in a great slew along with the data that answers the primary question?
So two elements to that, if I may. Firstly, has it happened before? The answer to that is yes in other organisations, and we've become aware of that since, regrettably. Has it happened within...
It's happened with other organisations?
In other organisations.
In other organisations. We've been made aware since this leak that there have been similar occurrences in other organisations.
In other police services?
Yeah, correct. And Chair, you made a reference before to, you picked on one particular service and suggested that the impact would have been very different, and indeed that's what has transpired in other places.
Can I ask another question?
Sorry, if I may interrupt, I've just come back to the second point in terms of has it happened before in our organisation? Yes. Well, as part of the review, notwithstanding the independent review, I didn't want to lose any momentum with this, so I ensured that we cracked on with our own review immediately. And we've been very careful to manage that alongside the independent review and the ICO investigation, but it was important that we understood where we had any vulnerabilities that we could immediately address, which we have done. So we have shared 501 submissions to the whatdotheyknow.com website, which is where this breach occurred.
Yes.
We've reviewed each and every one of those. There have been no other similar issues.
Yes.
We've examined 766 URLs which linked to the use of spreadsheets on our public-facing website, and seen if there were any other vulnerabilities there. There were none. And we have gone back through 2 years' worth of FOIs published by a variety of means, so in addition to the ones I just mentioned, and again we found no issues. Yeah. So we're confident that this, regrettably, as significant as it was an isolated incident.
Can you just walk us through very quickly? Somebody submits an FOI request.
Next thing.
Somebody looks at it and goes, yes, this falls within the regulations, so we're obliged to answer it. How do you task the person to answer it? Who then signs off the answer and effectively ticks the box that says this answers it, it's good to go? Just walk us through, please, that process as that existed at the time.
Yes, and that's a very important point, Chair, because we have already changed the process, recognising the vulnerability. But the situation as it stood at that time was that a Freedom of Information request comes into our corporate information branch, within which sits the Freedom of Information team. They also deal with subject access requests, etc. They process the request, identify who is best placed to answer the question in layperson's terms, and they pass the request on to the department that holds the relevant data. So in this case, it was an HR query, so it was passed to HR professionals who have access to the data set for the reasons of security that we've discussed, ironically, and then they answer that query. A senior manager within that department signs it off. It is passed through our corporate communications departments so that they can be aware of the nature of queries that are coming in. Often they are related to journalist inquiries, etc.
Sorry, just pausing there for clarification terms. An application comes in, or request comes in, somebody who's qualified in the rules and regulations of FOI requests says, this is an HR one, this is one for HR. They pass it to somebody in HR. Their involvement with the request then ceases?
No.
Or do they ask HR, this is what we need to answer, please reply to us, and we will handle the transmission of the data?
That is correct, yes. So after it has gone from the subject matter experts, in this case HR, through corporate communications, it returns to the FOI team, and then it is published by the FOI team. So the measures that we have taken...
Isn't that a little bit... should it not come back to the FOI team before it goes to corporate communications? That's trying to sort out the PR before you've worked out what the press release says.
They won't. It's just for awareness. It's kind of a parallel process. That point.
Well, parallel or next step. Your answer didn't suggest parallel. It suggested a staged approach.
It's for information purposes. They are not signing off the query. They are being made aware of the query.
So there could be the potential that they might issue something or put something into the public domain, which ultimately isn't going to be put into the public domain.
Sorry,
Or corporate communications people.
No, they would simply just be made aware.
So they don't see the material.
They do see the material,
right?
But the sign-off process would be from the senior manager in the department who's handling the query, and then the FOI team.
Okay. So how many pairs of eyes would look at material that's subject to an FOI or subject access request?
In a query of that nature, about 4 or 5 people.
Okay. Makes the question nobody spotted.
No.
It's glaring.
And that's so you'll I think in the conversations this morning initially the term human error was used. I think in my first media conference I used that term. Now I use that term purposely to differentiate between a mistake and an attack on our systems. I thought that was important to make that clarification. But when we've examined it further, you can see that it's gone through a number of eyes. The mistake has not been rectified or identified, which suggests that we have systems and process errors that we need to address, and that's what we've done.
Is it systems? I mean, it does beg a belief that 4 people charged with, one of which is a dedicated team, corporate comms will see all of them, and then whoever it is who it's farmed out to for an answer, that everybody makes the same mistake?
It does, Chair, but equally, because that's happened once, I can't rule out that happening twice, so I need to change things, and that's what we've done.
I appreciate that, but if one was a betting man or a betting woman, the odds of 4 people not spotting such a glaring error would be very considerable, wouldn't they?
And I think it's important, Chair, to in the defence of those involved, to highlight that it was not glaring to the naked eye, so to speak, and that is part of the issue. So the impact is obvious, significance is obvious, but the fact that the core data set remained attached was not obvious to the naked eye.
But that's because it was in another tab.
Correct, and the tab had been obscured.
So can you explain precisely what you mean by that?
I can. It's a way in which it was manipulated, regrettably, by those that were producing the data set, so that those that are familiar with Excel will know that tabs appear at the bottom of the page.
Yes.
If you manipulate the presentation of the tab you're working on, it can effectively move that tab to the left,
yes,
and it overlays the other tab, which was the one that contained the core data. So it's effectively putting a sheet on top of another sheet and completely obscuring it to the naked eye. So as the document was opened, the result was presented, which was absolutely acceptable. The core data was not presented, and it needed further scrutiny, which arguably and indeed should have happened,
yes,
to identify the presence of that.
So well, that's a very important explanation, because we need to understand. I mean, it's as the chair said, it's the equivalent of having a desk full of papers and picking up a sheet of papers and picking up too much, and then handing it over to the public domain. But it does beg this question. The FOI request seems to be, it doesn't in any way compromise the sensitivity and the importance of maintaining the confidentiality of the identity of police officers and staff. Why wasn't that information in the public domain anyway, and perhaps available on a website, so that the responder could have said, please go to the PSNI website, you'll find it all there?
Indeed, and we do actually have a strategy of doing exactly that.
Yeah.
So I think some of the members are aware that we have been subject to ICO inspection recently. We were under enforcement notice for failing to meet the compliance requirements around submission times for FOI requests. We put in place processes to address that, and we've sustained a level of performance above 90% for 12 months now, often in the range of 95%. So that has been very effective. In addition to dealing with the issues to be more efficient within the department, we've looked at the strategy around FOI, and to reduce the demand, we've sought to publish more information in the public domain.
Very sensible.
Unfortunately, this particular query and the precise nature of the query couldn't be answered with what was already in the public domain, and so a new query is run. Now again, I'm sure the review team will examine the veracity of that and whether or not we should have been more robust and pushed back on the precise nature of the query.
Yes, because I can imagine in some parts of the service where you've only got perhaps one or two individuals, the danger is if you sort of say you've got two people doing a particular type of role, that could lead to their potential identification. I agree with that, and that's a common problem with FOI, where you get numbers that are fewer than 10. But it's important, isn't it, that in the light of this, efforts are going to have to be redoubled to see how much material can safely be put into the public domain anyway, so that will then shorten the work of FOI officers and speed up your responses, because it'll be a quick referral to an existing website.
Right, indeed.
Just before I turn to Claire, we heard in session 1, said in various ways, but in shorthand it was this: a small under-resourced team, both in terms of bums on seats and financial resource to support, etc. You've referenced the enforcement notice, and so is one of the issues that feeds into this breach look, we've been not good enough in responding to FOI requests, we need to improve our output. Damn well put your foot to the accelerator and just get more stuff out in a more timely fashion. And therefore, the speed has been maintained to tick one box, performance output, but at the expense of quiet, calm, sober reflection, review, somebody very senior checking. I'm not a data person, but even I know that if you're looking at an Excel spreadsheet, there are things that sit behind it, and before you press end, it's quite useful to look and see what it is that sits behind it. And my children would laugh at me trying to claim to have any form of technological expertise. But has this been one of the problems, just sort of speed and output leading to a sacrifice of quality checking?
I'm satisfied, Chair, that in this case that was not a contributing factor, but it's an obvious question to ask.
What have you done to satisfy yourself that it is not a contributing factor?
Well, by looking at the nature of this particular request, we do still struggle to service some requests within time limits. This was serviced actually quite easily because the data set that the query was run from already existed, so that extract of HR data is done once a week for a number of purposes and was therefore already available, so that effort didn't have to be replicated, and that's what added to the speed in this occurrence, not any attempt to cut corner.
Would we be correct to therefore assume that the practice of, well, let's keep downloaded on a regular basis every bit of data surrounding the PSNI, and then from a core document on our desktops extract the information to respond to individual requests, that practice has now ceased, and that whilst it might be an absolute pain in the backside to do it, that as Sir Robert has intimated, a specific request comes in, that specific data set is extracted, but only that specific data set, rather than drawing it down from a document which can then have occluded tabs.
Correct. So the particular data breach in itself was brought to my attention at 4:10 on the day in question. Yes. By 6 o'clock I was chairing a gold group with colleagues across the organisation, including very specialist areas, and some immediate actions were set within that gold group, which included effectively locking down in the way that you've just described, recognising that would be a frustration to some, but was seen to be essential, and then we would seek to open it up once we understood exactly what we were dealing with and what further mitigation could be put in place. So that's the very simple strategy that we took from the outset.
Hannah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a few questions about the specific FOI and FOIs in general. You said that, what's the average time for the response of an FOI?
So 90+% are met within time limits.
The time limit is 20 days, the target time?
Yes.
And do you know how many, what period within that 20 days they tend to be delivered?
They do vary, so some of them, obviously a small percentage, we don't meet within that time limit. Some of them go to the wire. This one was turned around with just a few days. I think it was about...
That's my understanding. On average it's about 19 days, and this one was turned around in 2 days. You said that the data set already existed, but is that a normal speed to progress through all of those checks, including, bear in mind this was in holiday time as well?
The reality of this particular incident is that the magnitude, the impact is so serious, but the query that resulted from it was actually very straightforward, and that's why it took only a few days to turn around.
I understand that there was material sent to the National Police Chiefs Council, issued guidance in June, I think, about handling FOIs safely. Was that communicated to the various people who are supposed to handle FOIs within the PSNI?
Again, that's something that no doubt the review team will be looking at, and possibly the ICO in their investigation. It's been brought to their attention. That circular in June was not brought to my attention as a senior information risk owner, and I've been speaking to colleagues in the National Police Chiefs Council to see if there's something we can change in processes there. So I handle a number of portfolios. I regularly receive updates around those portfolios, be it firearms, public order, etc., which will also sit within my remit. They go to practitioners, but they also go to service leads such as myself. That enables me to reflect on what my team are dealing with, but to lean in when I see something of significance. And I'd like to think in such an occasion I'd have lent in.
Trying to understand genuinely how 4 people went through, and I can completely understand, I can understand how that happened. 4 people went through the document and didn't see the behind tab, and you correctly say, but I don't understand how within 2 hours of it being released somebody has found that tab. That bit's very difficult to get your head around. Is it visible to the naked eye, the behind tab?
So the
So you said
disclosure of the tab or the disclosure of the incident?
The tab with the offending data breach within it, my understanding from what you've said to my colleagues, is that essentially there was another tab overlaid, and I think everybody understands that you can do that, but that 4 people in your processes didn't see it, but within 2 hours the person who leaked it did see it. Was the back tab visible to the naked eye, or I don't understand how, if you couldn't see it without knowing it was there, how they knew it was there?
The tab at the bottom. So if you imagine a piece of paper that literally has a protrusion at the bottom as a tab, and on an Excel spreadsheet that's represented with a second tab, that had been they were perfectly aligned.
I understand
so
that, but if they were perfectly
tab.
aligned, how did somebody know to go and look behind it?
To the left of that, for those that understand Excel, there is an indicator that a tab exists.
Hang on a minute. Somebody makes an FOI request, Mr. John Smith of 32 Acacia Avenue. They get their request answered, and they go, oh, hang on, this is frightfully interesting. I asked for how many officers at each person in each rank, and they've answered that. Well, I tell you what I'm now going to do. I'm going to look to see if I can find a tab, or if there's any other information that they've sent me inadvertently. I think Ms. Hannah is right. That's just slightly of itself beggars belief, unless it took so damn long to download the response because they were downloading sheet after sheet after sheet. Did nobody just notice the size of the file?
Regrettably not, no.
So not only did anybody not notice this hidden tab, but nobody noticed the size of the file. Because, as I think it was Sir Robert, it might have been Miss Hannah who said, the information requested was probably one side of A4.
Indeed.
So, I mean, this is now surely, and I'm not falling into that typical politician's trap if somebody's got to be blamed, and we've got to go and tar and feather them or whatever it may happen to be. This just now smacks of incompetence, doesn't it?
Well, as you're aware, Chair, there is an independent review being carried out. They will look in the first phase.
I appreciate it, but in your opening remarks, ACC Todd, you said that you were the sort of professionally charged officer, you were leading this was your area of operational expertise. Forget the individuals involved. If you were presented with this as a sort of blind case study, the word incompetence would surely flutter across the front of your mind.
It's difficult for me to comment without impinging on the ongoing review, which will look at the behaviours of and responsibilities of everybody involved, including myself as CSIRO. As choosing my words carefully, I guess if an individual misses something, then you might immediately go to that conclusion, rightly or wrongly. When 2 people miss it, you may start to question that. In this case, we're 4. I think we need to look beyond incompetence and certainly on an individual human basis, and we need to look at the competence of the system and the process which has allowed that mistake to happen.
Do you have any concern that this was done deliberately?
No.
And how have you established that?
Just from the very nature of the actions that have led to this, the human reactions from the people who have been involved in this.
People who do things deliberately can be very good actors as well.
There would need to have been a conspiracy across a number of people for that to be the case, and that's beyond the realms of what's more likely than not, I would suggest, Chair.
Ms. Hannah?
Can I come back in just generally? I have heard that the PSNI receives more FOIs than the whole rest of the Northern Ireland Civil Service combined. Do you know, is that true?
I've heard that anecdotally. I can't provide any data myself to substantiate that. We don't have access to the data across the other organisations. There is police data which is accessible, publicly accessible through the National Police Chief Council's site. We do receive more FOIs than similar services So those of a similar size and sort of format. As a comparison, we receive about a third of the number that the Metropolitan Police receive, and obviously the Metropolitan Police are substantially more than 3 times the size of Police Service of Northern Ireland.
I'd be interested to try and find that out. What is the resource implication? How many people are employed sort of dealing with FOIs?
It's a small team. Forgive me, I don't have the figures in front of me. It's about 20 people in total. And one of the things that we've done immediately in response to this incident is we've looked at the structure of that team. We've looked at the role responsibilities within that team, and we have put in place a quality assurance team at that point at which the submissions exit the team and the organisation. The qualifications of those individuals will give them an improved understanding of the legal implications of what they're dealing with, and also some technical resource within there, so that any, arguably this was a very straightforward technical issue, but nevertheless we can't be complacent about what the next threat or vulnerability might be, so there will be some technical resource in there as well to ensure there's a more robust analysis of everything that leaves that team in the future.
And do you look at that with both a technical sort of data lens and I suppose a purpose lens? And I'm not suggesting that we police them so to speak, but I would assume these do. And it seems to me that there is a process where it gets flagged up. But in general, when you see, I think any of us who've journalists or politicians who use FOIs, you're trying to get to a certain, is there a process where people go, what is this person trying to ascertain from me? Are they generally just doing a school project about the number of, but are there, do you apply that sort of critical lens about what the purpose of the request might be? Not suggesting in any way that there's, nefarious purposes behind this request, but is that a way that you can maybe evaluate where you need to be particularly secure?
Yes, there is, and that's the reason why amongst us, our corporate comms department, corporate communications department, have sight of the FOIs so that they can see if there's any trends developing around natures of requests or any specific requests which are clearly looking at a particular issue which maybe we need to be alive to and prepared to respond to. Just
about the impact, many referrals have been made to the PSNI support unit about individuals and their concerns about their data.
So it was, of this weekend, 3,954, and I think my colleagues earlier mentioned the RAG status that we afford to that. 857 of those individuals were categorised as red in our status, and it's important to highlight that
it's about a third of the overall data breach. You said about 9,500, wasn't it?
Slightly of the number of people who've referred in total. Yes, it's slightly more than a third. And then probably about a quarter, less than a quarter within those who would be in the RAG status of red. And it's important to highlight that is not necessarily a heightened risk to the individual. It's the speed with which we think we need to speak to that individual and assess further.
Yeah. And just briefly, and then I'll hand back over. Some of it is about people's general confidence and security about themselves, and how insecure this has made them feel, and that's why we are concerned about their belief in the organisation's ability to deal with it. You did say on the day of the breach that there's nothing at the moment to suggest that there are any immediate security concerns. What gave you the confidence to say that?
That was the intelligence assessment at that time, and clearly we've been monitoring ever since then. Subsequently, we did highlight, as I did today, that we do believe it's in the hand of those that would seek to cause us harm. So we're continually assessing. We're also assessing that the robust pursuit of those that would seek to cause us harm, the arrests that we've made, the prosecution of those that we can demonstrate such alleged activity is having an impact on those that potentially would have access to it, and in layperson's terms, it's making them think twice about that for the risk of prosecution compared to the value that it affords them.
And finally, have you any way of establishing, do you believe that those, and I appreciate there have been arrests, those who have the information and have ill will, do you think they accessed it within the 2 hours it was online, or have they accessed it subsequently because it was circulating on WhatsApps or whatever?
It's very difficult to say. We have looked at the traffic across the website within those 2.5 hours.
How many hits?
The total number was in the region of about 300.
On this page, on this FOI question, as
Correct.
opposed to, and have you mapped that against
We
general?
have, so 200 of those would be sort of individual cases, because some would be duplicates and repeated access, etc. And about 100 of those are ones that we can assess more quickly than others. And then a very small number of those are ones which have caused us further concern. We have contacted each of those individuals and made them aware of the risks that they carry if they maintain access to this data set, and where we see evidence of potential criminality, we will relentlessly pursue those individuals as we have done.
And are they traceable by IP, or do people have to log in? Are they traceable? If I went on to access that page, do I have to log in with a password or whatever, or
To the original website?
to the original website?
No, it's a publicly available website. Your IP address would obviously be identifiable.
And is that how you've contacted the people who accessed it?
Well, suffice it to say we have.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Farry wants to come in, and Ms. Lockhart does as well. Mr. Lord, let me just shorten a question that I was posing to you, just to get a sort of very clear answer. So we are where we are. A Excel sheet in response to an FOI request or an Excel document is released, where 4 people who deal with these things on a very regular basis, one of whom it's their sole job to deal with FOIs, doesn't notice either A, the hidden tab, doesn't check for it to make sure that there isn't any additional information, and doesn't notice the size of the file, and it goes out into the public domain. Within 2.5 hours, somebody who has made the FOI request, and we don't know who that is, so it could be somebody who's very sort of skilled in these matters, it could just be, a member of the public who was asking for a school project or whatever it may happen to be. But somehow or another, they found the occluded tab and all of the data. And you've sought to assure us that you are absolutely confident that this was a effectively human error. We can, let's just use that as a working title. And you have no concerns at all that this wasn't a deliberate breach of data. Because I'm just finding it hard as a layman to understand why 4 people didn't spot, over what would have been quite a period of time of the compilation of the response to the FOI, but the recipient within 2.5 hours does. Now, I'm not writing the latest script or plot line for Line of Duty, but it just strikes me as stretching credulity just a little bit too far.
Which particular aspect, Chair? Sorry.
You were very certain and very speedy to answer that you had no concerns that this was anything other than human error stroke cock-up, rather than it being leaked deliberately and the person who was receiving it tipped off that this additional information would be provided because it might be considerably useful to them and or their organisation or colleagues. In essence, I'm asking you to assure this committee and therefore the wider Northern Irish public on the record that you are and the investigation has already concluded that there was no, for want of a better phrase, conspiracy, that this was not a deliberate leak of data.
Well, there is obviously an ongoing investigation into how the leak happened, and that may present further information, which I can't obviously rule out. But the initial assessment was very clear. There was no malintent in any of the individuals who were engaged in any way in this breach. Once the breach happened, though, then the value of the data became apparent to others who were then able to access it, and that's where the risk is presented. In the same way as any asset was left in the street by accident,
or on the top of a motor car.
Indeed, then the intent of the individual is not in question, but the intent of the person who then secures that asset is what's important to us, and this is no different.
Should we be surprised, concerned, angry, or possibly all three, that for a service which should need no lessons with regards to the sensitivity of the climate and environment in which it polices and does the work that it does, then all data is important, but in a Northern Irish context, it's important plus plus. Latterly, the PSNI have appeared to be rather cavalier with regards to data. I mean, it's sort of Mr. Bean that somebody should stick something on the top of a car and drive off. I mean, you might do it with your shopping list or something, or a bag of frozen peas that you've stopped off to buy while you're finding it. But the public are right to be worried, are they not? And your officers and support staff have a double right to be very worried.
We should all be concerned whenever there is a single breach of any of our assets, absolutely. And they should all be taken very seriously, absolutely, as indeed all of these instances are. I wouldn't say there's a cavalier attitude, absolutely not. I think the response that we've put in place is demonstrative of that we are taking this very seriously and have acted very quickly in order to address it. But
that's the hoovering up the mess after the mess has been made. There seems to be a worrying trend of an ability to create data breach messes within the PSNI.
And that's
and I'm not aware, correct me if I'm wrong, because if I am, I'll stick my hands up. But that doesn't seem to be as much of an occurrence in other constabularies across the United Kingdom, or am I wrong in that?
I would suggest that the scrutiny to other constabularies is very different, and indeed I'm aware of very similar instance to our own major data breach, which have drawn very little attention in other areas, but that doesn't diminish the seriousness of our issue and what we're dealing with. And I think the fact that we immediately put measures in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again was vitally important that we do that. But equally, we then identified how it had happened very quickly, put measures in place to stop that happening immediately, but then commissioned an independent review almost immediately, so that we could not be complacent that we had found everything and we wanted fresh eyes. We purposely went outside of the organisation and the existing bodies to bring in those fresh eyes, because we are subject to scrutiny on a regular basis. We have annual audit reports, we have inspections from the ICO, we were subject to an enforcement notice for 18 months, we had a separate, widespread voluntary inspection from the ICO. These issues were never identified by any of those bodies. So we have gone to new bodies to say, can you please look and see if there's anything else we're missing, because we absolutely cannot afford this to happen again.
But I mean, that's laudable, okay, and thank you for sharing that with us. But if, as the broad supposition is, that this breach, and I'm talking here about the extensive data breach, is a result of human error, well then there's a special program that somebody has to recalibrate the human psyche and our behaviours, etc. Anything is going to be subject to human error, so one can never say it's never going to happen again. It's about minimising the opportunities where it can. So are you going through a process of refreshing and rationalising who it is who's able to access within the organisation and from within the organisation the whole set of data which the PSNI holds.
Yes, we are. So this incident is very specific to freedom of information requests, but we are addressing every data set that leaves the organisation and is shared across the organisation. We're rewriting our service instruction, providing accompanying guidance to go with that. That is drafted and hopefully will be ready to share very soon. And until we have that, we have locked down many of our systems to ensure that data is not shared. That is causing frustration to some of our partners.
Yes, sure. It's the right thing to do. Can I brief you to cost? This may be without your sphere of expertise, but what's the PSNI's assessment with regards to the financial cost in terms of mitigating against the impact of this? But in the medium to longer term, what is the cost reputationally to the PSNI in terms of recruitment and retention, and the potential negative impact that might have on community safety, community policing, and evidence of criminality on the streets of Northern Ireland?
Well, some of that, Chair, is very difficult to quantify, as I'm sure you'd appreciate. But in terms of recovery costs, and ideally what we would like to do in order to address this, be that a universal officer to all of our staff, regardless of the individual threat, through to the very specific threat that some people may face. We estimate that that's somewhere in the region of £24 to £37 million.
24 to 37 million?
Correct.
And that excludes or includes the potential individual claims for compensation for a breach of data?
That excludes that.
And
so litigation would go beyond that.
And what's the and I appreciate it would be a ballpark figure, but what would the assessment of that be?
So obviously the ICO will run their investigation. They may take some action. I can't predict what that might be. But in terms of individual litigation, we naturally will plan for that eventuality. And I would estimate that could be in the region of 115 to 180 million.
So we're talking in ballpark terms of a unexpected expenditure of around about 230 to 240 million pounds.
Potentially.
This
is all potential, of course.
That's worst case
scenario.
Existing budgets clearly couldn't sustain
No.
that in any way, shape or form.
As my colleagues mentioned, we already have a funding gap of about 50 million.
So what, if any, representations have you been making to the NIO or indeed Director Treasury with regards to new monies, etc.?
Well, we are naturally sharing all of these considerations with our partners in the Department of Justice and the Department of Finance, and that is our port of call as a devolved administration.
But we haven't got a devolved administration, so they have a budget which we fixed yesterday, which is, as colleagues across the House referenced, wasn't deemed to be sufficient. I think, Mr. Lockhart, correct me if I'm wrong, something like a 1.5% reduction in the budget for the Ministry of, for the DOJ. So there's no new money in Stormont, even if Stormont was sitting, and Stormont not sitting obviously doesn't help. So who writes the cheque for this?
We're very alive to those considerations, Chair. We are obliged to work with the Department of Justice and Department of Finance in the first instance, and no doubt our colleagues in those departments will be.
Their civil servants are hamstrung on this. They have no ministers to give them political guidance. There is no opportunity for a combined political response to this from within Stormont. So it's got to be over the road at the Treasury or at the NIO, isn't it?
Well, regrettably, Chair, that's not within my gift to resolve, unfortunately. But
it's not in your gift to resolve, but there's only two organisations that can, well, there's only one organisation that can sign the cheque, which is HMT, isn't it?
Well, I hope our colleagues in Department of Justice and Department of Finance will help us in that regard.
I've got Mr. Farry and Ms. Lockhart. Let me take Ms. Lockhart first.
Okay, thank you. Just want to go back to your information around the spreadsheet and how data is stored. Can you walk me through how, so I assume the those dealing with the FOI had access to people's personal details, would that not be normally stored within a human resource system? And would that system not ordinarily be a locked system, or is it so antiquated that actually anyone in the organisation can access it?
No, you're exactly right, and that's exactly what happened. So the people who accessed it were HR professionals, so they're trained and accredited to access that system, and only them and other accredited individuals. The data is not manipulated within the system, though, because that potentially corrupts the system, so the data is extracted from the system, and it was HR professionals who extracted the data from that system because they have access to it, and then it was the extracted data that was worked upon, again by the HR professionals who are cleared to do that.
So we all know in our sphere of work the importance of GDPR and the importance of ensuring people's details are protected. It's beggars belief that human resource professionals who are trained in this would extract 10,000 lines of details and then forward them on. Were they forwarded on to other officers to then deal with, or what?
The extraction is a practice that you will see replicated in many places. An organisation of 9,500 people has a lot of HR matters to deal with on a daily, weekly basis. So this was just one query, but the access to that data is there for many reasons. So it is not unusual for individuals within that department to be accessing that data. That is their job to do that.
But it's then where it went to after that?
Yes, it should not have left.
How did it get to the FOI department who then published it?
So it should not have left. And that is the issue around the failure to identify that source data remained attached.
My colleague, Ms Hannah, has highlighted the time scale, and I have to say that rings alarm bells again in my head. I know whenever I would submit FOIs, quite often it's right to the last moment before you get the response, and indeed you actually normally get a response saying we're still working on collating this information, we'll get it to you in due course. It seems really, really bizarre that this was dealt with in 2 days.
And as
was there an assessment done of who had made this, or what the background to it was?
And as I said before, the significance of the breach is recognised, and if any of us could wind back the clock, we would, because you can't underplay the seriousness of this. But the simplicity of the query was what allowed it to take place within that timescale. The data had already been extracted for other reasons, so was available. Nobody had to go looking for it. It was available, and therefore the query was a simple one, and it was run in a relatively short time frame.
Someone did have to go looking for it. So this FOI jumped the queue, because I'm sure, as we've heard, there are so many FOIs come into the department. It was actually taking someone off potentially other FOIs and dealing with this one. But again, I'm not just totally sold on this 2-day thing, because, as I say, normally it does take a lot longer. In relation then to the data being realised online, at what stage, at what time did PSNI, were they made aware of it, and then when was it removed?
So I was made aware at 4:10, and I was made...
May I interrupt? Can you
Certainly.
take us back before, give us the audit trail, because I think this will help all of us. You were made aware at 4:10. You chaired Gold Command at, I think you said 6:10.
Yes.
So
When was the
removal-
PSNI notified? How were they notified? We don't need to know the name of the individual. How were they notified? When were they notified? And what's the gap between the PSNI body corporate being told
So
there is a data breach
Not just, Chair,
and them telling you?
Chair, not just you being notified, so I would assume someone beneath your role was notified. You know, take us right from when exactly the PSNI were informed that this had happened.
And unfortunately, I won't be able to do that. That may be something that the review team will be able to get to the detail of.
No,
The-
sorry, that's not good enough.
It's not that I'm withholding anything, Chair.
No.
I can't answer that question at the moment.
Well, look, I have to say, and I'm not seeking to do Ms Lockhart or me down, I don't think it's a rocket science question. We're asking here for a very basic audit trail. You've been able to tell us the Gold Command met at 6:10 under your chairmanship, that you were told 2 hours beforehand that there had been a data breach, that the from receipt of the FOI, the answer to the FOI request, the recipient or another had uncovered something which 4 people hadn't. How was the PSNI informed, and how did it deal with the information? I.e., how did it get from hello switchboard to Chris, you're the responsible officer here, we got a real problem? Walk us through that. And if you can't, Mr. Todd, I think we'd like to have that in writing by the end of the day, because I mean that seems to me a rather fairly basic question that one would expect you to be able to answer.
Well, let me try and answer, Chair, and then you can draw your conclusions, perhaps. But it is more complex than perhaps it's first apparent. So the information was loaded to the site in that afternoon. That site is of such a nature that you can subscribe to it, and you can set up notifications that you're interested in particular areas. And there will be people who have set up notifications to say that they are interested in PSNI FOIs. They will receive a notification. They will come from a range of backgrounds. What has happened is word of mouth has then started to circulate, and it will be a lot of mouths. And for me to track back to
This is the.
I don't want to be curmudgeonly on this, but and I'm sorry to be boring on this. 4 professional people charged with an FOI request miss something.
Mm-hmm.
Human error. It's posted. Somebody notices it. They may be very au fait with Excel and all the rest of it, but 4 people who deal with it on a daily basis don't, and 1 person does. Word of mouth tells the PSNI. No, somebody must have noticed. I mean, was it somebody from within the PSNI who went, I won't quite use the words that they might have used, oh dear, we've posted something that we shouldn't have.
Exactly that.
So it was somebody from within who noticed.
I was informed by a colleague and took action immediately. Now,
and
the first colleague to identify this is very, very difficult for me to identify.
No, I'm not asking you to, but this is helpful. So somebody from within the organisation notices that there had been a database. This was not the PSNI responding to a well-meaning member of the public saying, oh, I think you've put some stuff online which maybe you shouldn't have?
That's correct.
So this is somebody from within the organisation. Is this somebody from within the organisation who would have previously handled the data of that response to the FOI?
The first person to identify it, I honestly can't tell you who that person is.
As I said, I mean, was it PC O'Neill out on the beat who suddenly looked and went, oh, God Almighty, I better call back to HQ? Or was it somebody who's either within HR, within corporate comms, or within your FOI team who noticed that the error had been made?
The attention was brought to me by people within my team. I can't tell you...
That's within the FOI team.
Sorry, Chair. How were they informed? Did they note it?
I'm not
or
trying
was
to.
it,
I'm not trying to be difficult here. This is very. I just can't give you information I don't have, Chair. So people within the organisation were talking about the presence of this because they were alarmed. So there were a number of people.
Yeah, I think it's the initial. I think it's the initial point, and I think we've all been in organisations where if something like that did happen, WhatsApp groups would light up. But I suppose it's the point at which somebody again found the hidden tab, and then alerted. I think that's the concern. Not even, and yes, I think we do need to know the lapse and how long it took for, the emergency brake to be deployed, but it's the fact that it seems to be that it was on the website, and everybody looking at it seemed to be able to find the hidden tab.
You're right, but it distills to this, does it not? That, and I think this is germane to Ms. Lockhart's point, that the Commissioner, when assessing an organisation's response to FOI requests, doesn't go, oh, well, you answer the easy ones within 3.5 minutes of receipt and the difficult ones this. They don't triage that. It's a request is a request is a request. There's no compartmentalisation of them, as I understand it. Really, really tricky, easy peasy, what do you have for breakfast or whatever. So a very simple piece of information is requested. How many people are serving in each rank within the PSNI? That is answered within 2 days. Now, I can't presuppose and I wouldn't believe to be true, that the FOI request was the only one which the PSNI were dealing with. You would have had others, complex, as easy, easier, or whatever. That 4 professionals handling this, one of whom is part of the specialist team dealing with FOIs, doesn't notice something, a very significant data breach through a hidden tab on an Excel sheet.
Correct.
The file of which is going to be considerably larger than the A4 piece of paper that would have really been required. None of them noticed, but within 2.5 hours, somebody else within the organisation, or somebody within the organisation, did. Now, what I'm trying to get a hand on, and we're not asking for name, rank and number, is was it somebody within the HR team? Was it somebody within corporate communications? Was it somebody within the FOI handling team, that team of 20 which you referenced a little while ago? Or was it just, I don't use just pejoratively, was it an officer or somebody in the employ of the PSNI who may very well have also subscribed to an alert thing for information, suddenly looking at that and going, actually then manages to find the hidden data which 4 people hadn't. You must be able to answer, as I say, without rank and number.
Well, putting it in those terms, Chair, then yes, it's the latter.
So it's somebody from within the FOI team?
No, someone within the organisation.
No, we've established that.
So I'm struggling to understand what seeking to achieve.
What we're now trying to establish is, was it somebody who had previously handled this request and its response?
No, it was not.
Right. Was it somebody within any of the teams who would have been involved in handling the request and the response but hadn't been specifically charged or involved with answering it? Or was it somebody within the PSNI who is not part of corporate communications, who is not part of the FOI team, and who is not part of HR?
As I say, Chair, the latter, but I can't tell you who that first individual was.
You must be able to say...
I'm telling you it's the latter, Chair.
Yes, but, so that could be anybody within the PSNI. What we're now trying to get to, and you've clarified that it wasn't anybody who had handled the request, yeah? So we've excluded them. So what we're now trying to get an answer to is, having established the fact it's not one of them, but it is somebody within the PSNI. Is it somebody within the PSNI's human resources team? Is it somebody within the PSNI's corporate communications team? Is it somebody within the PSNI's FOI handling response team, or is it somebody in the PSNI who's not part of any of those three silos? Could be a police constable, could be a detective sergeant, whoever, but not involved in that bit of the administration of the PSNI.
So I'm struggling to give you that forensic detail which I think you're seeking to achieve, Chair, because there was common talk within the organisation by the time it came to me, so who was the first person is very difficult to identify. There is an independent review team that has been established to look into the detail forensically, and there is an ICO investigation, and they are tasked to potentially look at the forensic detail. So I can't present you with that information. The important thing is, within 2.5 hours, it came to my attention and I dealt with it. And the person who told me was somebody on my corridor or in my department. So, I mean, if I start working back through everybody, then I'm doing the job of the review team and the investigation team. So as Gold, I have not done that, Chair. So I can't present that information to you today.
You haven't done any form of investigation.
I'm satisfied that there was no malintent by those
That's
that
not my
responsibly. I'm satisfied that the person made the request had no malintent.
Again, Mr. Todd, that's...
Once the error was identified,
yeah.
It came to my attention within 2.5 hours, and I responded immediately.
All of which we have established. What we are now trying to establish is whether, and I understand if you say, look, we do know, but we're not in a position to tell you because this is subject to, and we can always go into private session if you wish. We do know, but I can't tell you at this precise moment in time. I don't know, and we're trying to find out, or we don't know, and we're not interested in trying to find out who, first of all, identified the breach, when focused on how to stop such breaches happening again, and analysing the robustness of our response to the data breach of itself. What I'm keen to hear, I think Ms. Hannah was keen to hear, Ms. Lockhart is keen to hear, is in that 2.5 hour gap between you picking up your phone, looking at a WhatsApp message, somebody coming to you along the corridor saying, Chris, something awful has happened, and you pressing the go command in 2 hour button, what I'm trying to get to is what happened in that window between publication and notification. We've established that it's somebody within the organisation of the PSNI. We're still trying to establish whether it is somebody with any of the three silos who would have been dealing with the request, either in terms of registering it, answering it, or responding to it.
Let me try and answer it this way then, Chair. I'm really, believe me, I'm trying to help as much as I possibly can here. I'm not sure the purpose we're seeking to achieve here, but let me try and help. So there is an independent review team who will look at these questions, and they haven't reported back yet.
Yeah.
There is an ICO investigation that will look at these issues. They haven't reported back yet. We have our own criminal investigation to see who is seeking to use this information for malicious intent. We have made good progress in that. I mentioned earlier that we can't go into the detail around that. The answer to your question will probably come from a combination of those strands of investigation, which I'm not able to share with you.
So the answer to the question is, it's a legitimate question, Mr. Hall, that you're asking. There is a investigation going on. We will know the answer to it, but we don't know the answer yet.
Correct.
Thank you. But we do know that it was from within the PSNI, rather than a journalist, say, for example, who's logged on to the website, who may subscribe for notifications, suddenly calling up as a concerned citizen saying, I think somebody needs to check on this.
Correct. As I said before, we were not responding to a call from the public. We were not responding to an alert within the teams responsible. We were responding to information within the organisation.
Okay. And are we right to be concerned, therefore, that the professionals charged with the compilation and the signing off and the publication didn't notice it, but another did?
We should all be concerned about this for a variety of reasons that we've discussed, Chair, yes.
Ms. Lockhart.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the audit trail, can you just clarify, you were made aware of it at 4:10 by someone from within the organisation, of which the chair has very forensically examined, still no further forward in terms of the rank, but anyhow, 4:10, you then called a goal command at 6?
So at 4:10 I was made aware my first action was to have the data taken down.
So it was removed at 4:10?
No, we sought to remove it at 4:10. It took until I think it was 4:47 before it was taken down. So we had to identify the website, we had to identify a responsible person within the website, we had to negotiate with them to act without any court order, for example, at that time. So 37 minutes later we were able to achieve that.
And do you feel that PSNI could have acted quicker, given the chatter between some officer recognising this, it coming to you, and then removal?
I'm satisfied with the response from the moment that I was made aware. Whether I should have been made aware sooner will probably come to the point that the chair was identifying there, and yourself, sorry, that will be identified through those strands of investigation that are ongoing.
In my mind, and obviously it's subject to investigation, as soon as an officer was made aware of or found this, it should have been escalated to you immediately.
I would agree.
Such is the magnitude of this issue. So I think from within the organisation there is a massive question around why it wasn't escalated to your senior role much quicker than what it actually was. So, and I know that will all come out in the washing with regards to the investigation. If the PSNI, obviously, rank and file officers now have concerns about how their data was held, how it was published, etc., etc. How can the general public have confidence that their data? So I ring up 101 tonight with some information, some highly sensitive information. How can the person that rings up to give that intelligence or that information bear confidence that the PSNI will not do exactly the same thing with the public's information?
I think that's a really relevant question, and that is a key tenet of my strategy, is to rebuild trust and confidence internally within the organisation so that our people trust us to hold their data, and externally so the public trust us to hold their data and our partners that we work with. All the measures that we're putting in place through the review, the examination, the implementation of lessons that are learnt from that will hopefully go some way towards that, being transparent, being humble about the areas that we have made, and demonstrating to people that we absolutely want to not just fix this, but fix it and improve upon the systems and processes that we had in place before, I hope will go some way to rebuilding that trust and confidence. I know it will not be a quick fix.
Because my fear is, and I think of my own constituency of Upper Bann, which obviously has a significant, well, not significant, small nucleus of people who want to drag back. And there are people who put their head above the parapet, contact the PSNI with information that's extremely sensitive and could be harmful to them, if it was known that they were in contact with PSNI. And I do think it really does damage that line of communication as well from the general public, because they will be thinking, hearing what they've heard today from this session, that, well, actually all of this data could be available and made available by human error.
Well,
so again, it goes back to the system.
And I would come back to the point I made earlier that we have already implemented a review of what has been made available, and we have found nothing in those 501 publications on the website. We found nothing in those 766 URLs on our own public-facing website, and we found nothing in the last 2 years' worth of FOIs. That should provide some assurance, but that doesn't minimise the impact of what has happened here. And we are not being complacent that is sufficient, and hence we have an ICO investigation and an independent review to try and find any further hidden vulnerabilities. we will be in a better position at the end of this. My aspiration will be the most secure police service.
Can I now then take you to, I think you quoted the figure of 800 officers who have been red flagged, or 890 odd officers who have been red flagged. Can you kind of walk us through that triage process, why it maybe has taken so long, and what's the next step for those officers, and does that actually include, so is that 800 of the 3,000 that have came forward with concerns, or is that the police assessment of the entire 9,000?
That's 857 within the 3,954 who have been referred into the emergency threat assessment group. So every member of staff within the organisation has been contacted by their line managers, and I know that you and other members have received information that some of that was difficult at times. On day one, senior colleagues, including myself, were speaking to people on the phone, and other colleagues were doing that specifically with purpose. I had some individual conversations, but they carry the credit for this hard work that was done in the first day or two. We were soon evident that we couldn't sustain that level of contact, so we then were reliant on individual line managers to pick that up for us throughout an organisation of 9,500 people. We absolutely need everybody to lean in. It took some time for some line managers to contact all of their people, holiday period, absences, etc. We've worked very hard to emphasise the importance of everybody doing that, not just looking to your team, but looking to where your peer is absent and looking after their team as well. So we got there, and everybody in the organisation, and I've sought this assurance being fed back up to the command team, to that level, that every step in that chain has given me that assurance that everyone's been spoken to. The people who are absent from work and unable to access systems are being spoken to in person, and those that are unable to access their data through the portal that we've produced. So we now have a portal so that an individual can access the one line of data and see exactly what was breached. They are having hand-delivered letters to make sure that they also have direct access to the very precise nature of the data, which all helps with their own personal assessment of their vulnerability. And then we have the assessment team who deal with those people who either through their line managers, through that contact, have been referred in, or individually suggest that they have some concerns. And they range from some people who might initially be in the red status, so we need to speak to this person very quickly, is what red means. And when we speak to them, we find that everything is in place that needs to be in place, and they immediately come back down to green. To those that might need the highest level of assurance, and one end of the spectrum, as we discussed earlier, is those that are sped, so effectively have to move house. We haven't had anybody in that category as yet, but that is something that policing in Northern Ireland has had to deal with on a regular basis, as you'll no doubt be aware.
And just, Chair, in relation to then the kind of the 800 post, the fallout from it, in relation to access to support for them, be it extra security measures or SPAD or whatever, what is the financial situation there? And we did hear in the previous panel, I'm sure you heard, in relation to the snarl up in the NIO with regards to getting some of those measures paid for and procured. What's your assessment of that? And have you made any further representation to, and I'm maybe doubling up here, but has there been any sort of conversations with the NIO, with Secretary of State, around the financial fallout from this, the asks of this government to actually support the police service, which is in an absolute dire state of affairs at this point?
So the Secretary of State has been well briefed, and the NIO are well briefed. So the gold groups that I chair have representation from a range of partners, including the NIO, so they sit on the goal group and they are engaged in all of the conversations we have, which includes all of these measures and the financial implications of that. The home security element, so I mentioned before about the total recovery costs, could be somewhere between 24 and 37 million, depending on what is achievable. The home security alone would range somewhere between 7 and 11 million potentially, for that range of options that we just described earlier. And in terms of how we fund that, I'm afraid it's back to the conversation we had earlier, where we're absolutely presenting this in a coherent way to our colleagues in the Department of Justice and Department of Finance, and asking that they support us by whatever means they can.
And there, in all likelihood, the ICO, there could be financial penalties as well in relation to the breaches?
Potentially, that's a matter for the ICO. They do share advice around how they deal with these things, which is publicly available. You'll no doubt be able to access that and see the way that they respond to public sector organisations, recognising that this is public money ultimately. But I can't speak on their behalf where they will fall on this particular incident.
I'm conscious of Dr. Farry, you
quite like to take the same time everyone else took, Chair, including yourself.
And yeah.
No, I wasn't trying to.
I still have one question, Chair.
Okay, let Carla finish with her question,
Yeah.
and then we'll come to you. You can have as long as you wish.
Yeah. Just in relation, it's more, it's a comment, but it's obviously a question attached to it. You know, there is, and this, whilst you're responsible for the data and the breach, there is a lot of concern out there in relation to all that is going on, be it the numerous breaches, the Ormo Road incident, the Bobby Story funeral incident, and there is a real perception out there, and actually it's not just perception, I don't believe anymore, that there is two-tier policing. It is an all-time low in relation to the PUL community, and the political interference that has been evidenced through the recent investigations. What, as an organisation, as a senior leadership team, are you doing to try and restore that confidence in policing?
Well, I would say that, you know, we absolutely recognise that trust and confidence in policing is damaged by incidents such as this, and trust and confidence in policing is crucial for trust and confidence in law and order and for the stability of the society that we all want to live in. So it is absolutely a priority for the police service. In terms of the other incidents that you mentioned, I'm not in a position to comment on those personally, and I'm well aware that with the resignation of the Chief Constable yesterday, my colleagues in the executive team are meeting this morning, and the policing board will no doubt be liaising with my colleagues, and I will be picking up those conversations as soon as I return from here today to see how collectively we as an executive team can work in the next days, weeks, months, years ahead.
Dr. Farry.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And good afternoon to ACC Todd. I will actually be relatively brief, Chair, but I just want to follow up on a number of issues that have been raised by others, just to seek some clarification. In no particular order, and going back to the issue around the They Work For You website, in terms of the traffic, in terms of this particular data set, how do the numbers of people looking at it differ from what would be the norm for other FOIs that go up, including FOIs from the PSNI?
That's a very interesting question, actually, and unfortunately it's not one that I can answer. So you'll appreciate there are some privacy issues around analysis of public websites. Now, there's very specific circumstances here where we've been able to do some work, which has been helpful. I purposely haven't gone into the details of how we've achieved what we've achieved there. But suffice to say,
going into who was accessing it, the numbers surely is anonymised and can be.
It would be information that would be retained by the website host, though, and not immediately available to myself.
Given that they are very keen on transparency, they may be keen to.
They may.
It's a two-way issue. This actually may be a slightly helpful one in terms of the issue, in terms of the data breach itself. My understanding is that the ICO require FOIs to be published in what the term format that can be manipulated. So, in theory, if this very simple piece of information that was the official request was turned into PDF, this risk would have been eliminated in terms of the other tabs. Is this something on reflection that the wider public sector and indeed government need to reflect upon in terms of how FOI works? Or I mean, what is the public interest rationale, the other way of looking at it, in terms of ensuring that data is provided to an inquiry in a format that can be manipulated?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. So the immediate action we took was to limit every publication to for want of a better phrase, a flattened PDF. So there was no data in there that could be manipulated. You're correct, that is contrary to the guidance from the ICO themselves and the legislation which supports this, which says that it should be in a machine-readable format. The easiest machine-readable format that most people can access is Excel, but it's not limited to Excel. The systems that we use naturally export into Excel rather than other formats. So again, in terms of effort that would be required to rectify that is considerable. One analysis that I asked for in relation to a submission which would ordinarily be presented by way of spreadsheet, if that was manipulated to a PDF, to flatten each element of that would have equated to almost 1,000% increase in effort for that one submission. So it's very easy to say, and that's exactly what we did, but the implications are also significant. So what I'm aiming to achieve is a kind of a graded effect where we will simply publish flattened PDFs where necessary, and where we have to share data in a more readable format, particularly with trusted partners, we will come to an arrangement which provides sufficient safeguard mitigation in order to enable us to do that. But certainly public FOIs, the starting point will be flattened PDFs.
In terms of how this was assembled, is there an issue in terms of what I suspect was a really junior member of staff who did the actual work on assembling the original FOI responsible for managers looked at it, but that person presumably themselves had access to the entirety of the names of the entire PSNI workforce. I mean, is there a protocol inside the organisation in terms of who at what rank and what level can have access to that level of data which is sensitive? Obviously, you want to trust everyone, but I'm not suggesting this person was in any way untrustworthy whatsoever, but that's surely a risk. When you've seen, for example, some extreme situations where some junior clerks in US intelligence services have actually gone on and leaked massive tranches of US intelligence, and people asking the question, how on earth did someone at that level in an organisation have access to that broad breadth of information?
Yes. So, I mean, the rank and grade is not necessarily an indicator of what somebody should access. Their vetting and clearance is what would determine that, and that's often role dependent rather than rank or grade dependent. But certainly the people who have access to that data it should only be those that are suitably cleared, suitably accredited.
There's also a need to know issue as well that goes beyond that. There should be a high bar for that level of information being shared within an organisation, even for an FOI compilation.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of the wider breaches, not the wider, the other breaches that have become identified over the summer months, without going into specifics necessarily, can you confirm that are there accountability / disciplinary processes underway in relation to those individuals who were involved in those?
Just to be clear, you're talking about this particular breach
No,
and
not the other ones. I mean,
the Newton Abbey and
yes,
the laptop on the vehicle.
Yeah.
Yes, they're all subject to ongoing parallel investigations.
Okay, and the next question then is just to, in terms then of the impact on officers. Are you in a position to tell us how many officers have resigned since the data breach from the PSNI, or obviously we're not a full month through yet, how many have tendered a resignation in this period?
So my colleagues earlier referenced the 28-day period for resignations, and what we would hope to achieve here is an exit interview for everybody that leaves, and to specifically be addressing this issue. So some of those have not yet worked their way through that 28-day cycle. I think today is probably 28 days from the day of the breach. But we do know of one resignation so far where someone has specifically referenced the data breaches as an impact.
Have there been other resignations since that period, or put another way, has there been any noticeable spike in the number of resignations, even if at this stage they haven't given a reason? Has there been a uplift in the level of resignations since the data breach?
No, not in terms of resignation. The other sort of indicators that we're monitoring are things like sickness levels, and we have seen a number of so an increase in sickness levels over the last period. It went up very slightly, sort of only 1 on the previous week, but 54 of the people currently sick are identifying the data breach as an impact factor, which is up 5 from the previous week, so a slight increase there.
You also set out a very challenging figure in terms of what this might ultimately cost the public purse in terms of all the different components. Obviously that's going to be spread out over a period of time. It's not going to all hit the organisation at once. But do you have a sense of what's likely to hit in this current financial year, to give a sense of the immediacy of the crisis, set aside the other pressures that the organisation is under financially?
Well, the immediate impact would be the recovery costs.
Yeah.
So that is something which I would absolutely want to see delivered within this year. Ideally, I would like to deliver something tangible to all of my colleagues today, if it was in my gift to give, be that a universal offer around personal security measures regardless of threat. But I have to work through the processes.
Yeah.
But certainly that recovery cost needs to be within year.
Yeah.
And that's 24 to 37 million.
Yeah. And I respect this as probably best a conversation to be had in private with the Federation and others and NIPSA. But in very, very broad terms, is that something that's likely to happen on an individual assessed basis for every single person, or is it possible to do it on on more of a block categorisation basis, which might make the process move a little bit quicker?
Well, our established practices and processes and policies enable us to deal with specific threats and specific needs. So if there was somebody who was subject to an identified threat, we would deal with that, and our budget allows us to deal with that. So, for example, we have a budget which will enable us to deal with a number of people who need to be sped, if potentially every year. That's built into our grant, or the way in which we use our grant. This would be beyond that, and I personally would like to see exceptional circumstances recognised in this case, and that we had something to offer all of our colleagues, because the impact, the perceptions become reality, and the impact on all of our colleagues is notable. And I know that a lot of people are feeling frustration, anxiety, anger as a result of this. And I think we owe it to all our colleagues to do whatever we can in these circumstances. But I have to caveat that I can't promise what's not within my gift to give.
Sure. Also, could just maybe invite you to probably help your case to elaborate a little bit in terms of the funding mix that the PSNI receives. Obviously, the vast majority comes from the block grant, but there is also then the additional security funding, which is a discrete package, which has been flatlined for the past number of years. So there is a recognition that there is a residual NIO UK government responsibility, with certain elements of counter-terrorism being reserved rather than being in the devolved space. And obviously the key threat here is a terrorism threat, which is deemed to be a national security issue for the UK government. So to what extent is that factor playing in to how you're approaching this with talking to the NIO in terms of how this is to be addressed?
That is clearly part of the conversation, and as you say, that is very specific to the NIO around the additional security funding. That's something which is dealt with year in, year out, as you know, at different times of the year, and no doubt we will be refreshing that regardless. I'm hopeful that there will be conversations that are specifically relevant to the impact of this data breach, which will influence some of that. But that again, that will be, it's not grant funding, it's ASF funding, as you articulate.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, Assistant Chief Constable, thank you for your time. We do appreciate you. A huge amount of work going on within the organisation, and it's good of you to have taken the time to fly over and absent yourself from that important work in order to answer our questions, and we're grateful to you for that. We look forward to keeping over the detail as this evolves, and hopefully those questions get answered as quickly as possible to, as Mr. Hart and others have suggested, restore trust and confidence from the general public, and also the confidence of those who work under the banner of the PSNI, that they and their families are safe and due diligence is being followed. So thank you for your time, and wish you well with your work, and doubtless we will hear from you or somebody else from the PSNI in the not too distant future. But for the meantime, thank you very much indeed. Order, order.